Now we got 25 points.
All right, so the first thing we're going to be talking about today is syncing footage with audio. There's a few different ways you can do this. There we go. So there's a few different ways you can do this. You can do it. You have to sync your footage with your audio anytime you are recording audio to a separate recorder. So if you're using a field recorder or an audio recorder and you are using your camera to shoot the video, later in post-production, you're going to have to find a way to match them together, sync them together so that when the audio plays, the video is playing that same portion. And on the screen here, you have that slate. That is what that slate is used for. No matter what way you're going to be doing this, they always recommend using a slate. Manually, you're going to have that thing just so you can line it up in post-production. But if you're doing automatically or with timecode, they still recommend using a slate just so you have a backup in case it doesn't, in case something goes wrong with the way the automatic syncing works, or if the timecode messes up somehow, you'll still have a way to be able to sync your audio with your video. And that way you can still edit and match it up perfectly. Because if your stuff's out of sync, it's going to be really noticeable and irritating to the audience, and it's not going to be good. So they recommend that even if you are going to be syncing your footage with your video, whether you're doing it through timecode or something like that, they say you should always record audio to your camera anyway. So if your camera can record audio internally, use it. If it can't, then you want to plug in some kind of mic. Even if it's a cheap, small mic, you still want to plug it into that camera so that it can record the audio to itself. That way you can have a reference for the audio that you're recording separately in your audio recorder. It's called a scratch track when you use it like that, because you're not really meaning to use the in-camera audio for the actual video. You are just trying to use it for a reference point to match up your audio with your video from the separate audio recorder later on. So one thing you always want to make sure is that your sampling rate on your camera's audio and the recorder are the same. So that'll be like the 4,800 kilohertz or the 9,600 kilohertz, 96,000, I mean. And that'll be like what the sampling rate is. It's kind of like setting your frame rate on your camera, but it's for your audio. So you're setting your sampling rate for your audio. You want to make sure that the camera's one are the same as the recorders, because if you don't have the same sampling rate, the audio is going to drift at some point further into the audio clip. And even if you get it synced at first with the slate, and when the slate hits, if you line it up perfectly, if it's a long clip, and you have the sampling rates different, eventually that stuff's going to get out of sync because it's going to drift and it's going to keep separating farther and farther the longer the clip is. So you want to make sure everything's the same. So that way, when you're using that reference point, when you're matching up your audio from your camera and the recorder later in post with the video, it's going to stay in sync the entire time and not drift out. So always make sure you're checking that stuff. All right, so the way you do automatic syncing, you're going to use your editing software like Premiere Pro, or any of the editing softwares, the modern ones use these, where you can automatically tell it to sync the audio. It works if it has pretty clear audio from the camera, and it has to have audio from both the camera and the separate recorder, which is another reason they say go ahead and record audio to your camera anyway, because it'll check the audio, it'll check the wavelengths and everything, and it'll check the information from both audio sources, and it'll line it up to exactly when those moments happen. And that's another reason to use Slate, is because when you use the Slate, it's going to have a very clear indicator. Like in this image right here, you can see that's where the slate hit. It makes a very big line on your wavelength of the audio file. So whenever you're matching up the audio, whether you're doing it manually or whether you're doing it automatically, it makes it easier for the system, or it makes it easier for you to identify where those files need to sync up at, where they need to match. And what you'll do is if you're using in-camera audio and you have your audio video clip, which is the one that was in your recorder, your camera, and then you have the separate audio clip that's recorded from the audio recorder, you're going to match it up, and then you're going to either just mute the track that has the in-camera audio, or you're going to delete the in-camera audio, and you're going to sync up the other two, link them together so that in your editing software, your new audio source is going to be attached to your video, so you don't have to worry about it getting out of sync again if you're moving it around and trying to figure out where to edit it, cutting it up and things like that. You'll always want to make sure that if you're taking multiple takes, especially since we're doing like narrative works and things like that, videos, short films, we're taking different takes, we're making different scenes, which is another reason the slate is important. It's not just for this audio and video, it's also to match up for your editor to figure out what file it is, or for you to hear it in the audio and also see it on the video clip so you can name and title your files. So it makes it easier to organize, and it makes it easier to sync up these things in post. But you always want to make sure you're doing it at each beginning of each take. Anytime you stop that camera, anytime you stop that audio recording device, that's a cut, and you need to make another, you need to do the slate again to make sure that each one is going to have a slate and each one's going to have that mark in the file. Because if you just start recording again and you don't do it, then that audio file won't have it. And then it'll be harder for the system to figure it out. And they say sometimes the automatic way doesn't really work out exactly right. And that's why manually you might have to do it, which is another reason. Again, another reason why you want the slate is if it isn't working out automatically, you want to be able to have a visual representation for yourself, a backup to be able to do it just in case. Like if one of the mics for some reason wasn't picking up very good audio, maybe the in-camera mic was farther away and you were shooting from a distance, but you had the boom operator was really close to the actor, so he was picking up very clear audio, but the camera was picking up very crappy audio because it's very far away. Then maybe the automatic system's not going to really be able to figure it out. There's going to be other noise happening in the in-camera audio, or something's going to be out of sync. And then when you try to automatically sync it, it doesn't really know where to look, and it messes up in where it tries to do it. And that's why manually doing it might have to be the backup or the secondary choice for you to do.
Remembering, guys, that if you have any like stuff that like, that you remember while you were doing it, or that and like want to make a note of, we're learning this together. So if there's any pointers, tips, anything you guys also know and want to add, feel free.
I have a quick question. You were mentioning the sampling rate, Lakota, that it has to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
So it syncs not just in the beginning, but also in the end. How do you ensure that?
You can, you just mess with those settings in your camera and in the audio recorder you're using.
Okay.
So it's just like picking your frame rate and things. You just want to make sure you're also checking out the audio, even though you're not going to use the audio from your camera in that instance. You still want to make sure that it matches whatever you're doing in the recorder you're using.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks.
Yeah, because if it doesn't, then eventually, like I was saying, the file's eventually going to get out of sync. The longer that video file or that audio file is, it's going to get out of sync later on in the clip. So even if we looked at this, like let's say we did it at 48,000 kilohertz for the recorder, and we did 96,000 for the camera. Well, the slate might match up right here, but later on down the line, eventually the waveforms are going to not be aligned, and it's going to be a lot harder to try to fix that issue, because you're not really going to know where it starts and where it ends, where it starts to drift apart, where it starts to separate.
Yes. No, thanks. I just wanted to know that there's a setting. Yeah, so there's a setting on the camera. Okay, great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you'll have to go into, each camera is going to have it differently. So you'd have to look in your
I was going to
camera.
ask, is there a guarantee that that's for every camera? I feel like no, right? Or is that like a basic thing that's in?
If your
All
camera
of 'em now.
records, if your camera records audio or has the ability to have a mic plugged into it, then it will have some
Okay.
way to know what kind of rate it's going to be sampling it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just like if your camera records video, then it's going to let you know what frame rate it's able to do and things like that. So
Just wanted to clear that up just in case. I don't know.
oh yeah, no, definitely. So what you'll do if you have to do it manually, you'll have the video clip in it'll be in your editing software, and it'll be a lot bigger than that little picture right there. You'll have it very large so you can see where that slate claps, and you want to zoom in as close as you can in your timeline so that you can see it frame by frame. You might even want to change it to the audio sampling because they say that that's a little more precise, like whatever time frame they use in the editing software itself. The audio sampling, if you change the timeline to show audio sampling instead, like each audio sample or whatever, it'll be more precise than just looking at frames. So you want to change that, and then you want to zoom in as close as you can to your timeline so you can see as close as possible, and you can start dragging these things and moving them frame by frame. That way you can match them up almost exactly. It sometimes, especially when the mics are a little bit farther apart from each other, you'll have the mic, it won't be exactly in sync like this. It might be like the bottom one might be a little bit to the right, and that's okay as long as it sounds like it's coming at the same time. It just means that the mic that was farther away is picking it up like a very slim amount later than the mic that was right next to the actor when they were speaking. So it doesn't mean that it's out of sync. It just means that the mic was picking it up at a different point, but there's still, to us, it's still going to sound like it's coming at the same time. But you want to always do it frame by frame, just so you make sure right when those two, right when it claps, right when it hits, that's when you're putting that spike down and you're seeing like exactly where it is. So you line it up perfectly. And then of course, anytime you're doing this automatically, or if you're doing it manually, you always want to check it just to be sure that, you know, it's actually in sync. I would check it at the beginning for a few seconds, and then I would check it at the end for a few seconds just to make sure the whole thing's pretty much in sync. And then once you start editing around, you'll have it all good to go. Now, if you didn't record a scratch track to your camera, like if your camera doesn't record audio, or if you just didn't have an extra mic and it doesn't do it internally, then you definitely have to use manual, and you have to just look at the video and see where it's going to line up your audio to the video and do it that way. But especially if you're doing it manually, it's good to have a reference point, another audio file. So if you do have the ability for your camera to record audio, do it just because. So that way, when you line up the real audio you're going to use, you can hear it's happening at the same time, and you can know that it's in sync. Doing it completely manually without that scratch track is there's a little bit more room for error. So you just want to be a little more careful and make sure that you're getting it right. Let me see. Oh, audio units. That's what it's called. So you can switch your timeline to show audio units, and that'll be more precise than frames. Does that make sense, everybody, so far? Any questions or comments?
Could you repeat that last part about audio units?
Yeah, so usually when you're editing in your software, it'll show frames, so you can see each frame. But you can tell there's somewhere on each editing software, it's gonna be a little different depending on which one you're using. But you can tell it what to show you as far as like whether you want to see frames or whether you want to see seconds, or whether you want like whatever you want to see, it'll show you. And so audio units will be a little more precise to match up to sync it up, just because audio units will be there's a little bit more audio units than there's frames usually.
Yeah, I have
audio.
noticed that, and it has been frustrating because I do not know how to go into that mode yet.
Gotcha. I think it was just like the person showed it on one of the videos in the syllabus. It clicked like a little one of the corners of, I think it was just the timeline corner itself where the little drop down menu is, and then just said like show audio units. And I'm sure if you looked it up, like Google it, you could just see where precisely it would be. Also, if anyone's editing on a software, you can, like Premiere Pro allows you to change around your workstation. So depending on where it is for one person, it might not be exactly in that area for you, depending on how you set up your workflow.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so the next way to sync the footage, and this is arguably the most precise way, and it's the way that it's done on most professional sets, is to use a timecode generator that's going to match your audio with your video exactly as it's being recorded. So then you use a timecode syncing software. If it's not internal to your camera, if you're using an external timecode generator, then you have to sync it later in post using a timecode software. And that's going to automatically sync everything from audio and video in post-production for you. So timecode is in some cameras have it internally, and some audio recorders have it internally. But if you have some of the more consumer area stuff, some of the cheaper stuff, it's most likely not gonna have its own timecode. It's just going to have, or if it does, it won't be an exact version that's able to sync with everything. It'll just be one that like kind of keeps track for you of what it says the time is on the clip. So if you don't have it internally in your devices, you can buy separated timecode generators, something like this. This is something we used on our short film, Tentacle Sync. It's just it's a little Bluetooth timecode generator clock that sends out what the timecode is to the devices, so that if it doesn't record it itself, it'll still have timecode and it'll still be able to sync up with everything. To use the timecode generator, you're going to need an audio recorder that can receive it, and you're going to need to connect the cameras to it with their own timecode, so everything has the same timecode and lines up. One of the ways that most of the larger productions do it is they use a centralized device to what's called Genlock all of the devices, which just means that it's telling them all that same time code. And it's usually a device that can do it internally. Some of the higher budget field recorders can do it, and it'll have its own time code clock. And then you'll just tell everything else what the time code is, so everything's on the same page. That way something's not running a second behind. Nothing's, even if it's showing kind of the same time, because of the way time works and the way these devices handle time, each one's going to handle it a bit differently, which is why anytime you're trying to use time code, you have to actually connect the devices somehow to each other so that you can say, no, this is the time code I want you to follow, not the internal clock you're doing, because they'll eventually get out of sync just because of the way they do time. Even though it might be very slightly off, it's still going to be off just a bit. So you always want to make sure that you are telling it which one is the real time code you want to use. It's called making the others a slave to the master. So you make like a master one saying, this is the master time code, and the slaves become slaves to that master and say, okay, this is the time code you want me to use. And they all sync up that same exact time code. So they're all perfectly in sync with each other. This is what the time code will look like when you're seeing it. It'll have the hours, the minutes, the seconds, and even the frames. So depending on what frame rate you're shooting at, it'll show you the different frames. And if you're watching it, you'll see the frames shoot up really quickly and the seconds will go by each second. And it'll allow you to see that every single thing is in sync by the frame if you're looking at everything at once. something like Tentacle Sync, it allows you to even do it through an app through Bluetooth. So you can actually see all the devices that's connected to it and what their time code is. So you can just double check to be sure that it is all, that they're all completely following each other and nothing's off or nothing's not working properly.
Sorry, honey.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question that's not related to the time code, but it's question that someone in the email and I asked, and I wanted to know if this was like, if we put this in the syllabus or if we are going to study this anytime soon. So someone asked, said that they were interested in video with voice dubbing, like that would probably be syncing the audio as well, correct? Like syncing the audio that they recorded over the video.
Yeah, so that's the most likely they'll be using a separate audio recorder while they're doing the voiceover.
Okay, so because they said super interested in editing video with voice dubbing. They said they edited a video over the holidays and are having technical issues with making a final cut. So we will be like, I know that we studied a little bit about layering and stuff like that. I believe it was last week or the week before. They're all blending together for me.
Layering like the audio, you mean?
Yeah. Was it last week?
I mean, we learned something about that like last semester too.
Yes,
The
that
sound.
was last semester. They're all blending together. They're all blending together for me. Yeah, so are we going to delve deeper into that, or do you think that, I mean, I can't really think of anything else. I'll probably respond after the meeting. We'll probably respond to the email. But I was just thinking, is there anything else that we either didn't cover or are covering this semester as far as like melding the audio with the video and that kind of thing?
As far as editing goes, it's mainly just about like syncing it, and then it was going to be a little bit about sound tools that you can use to edit sound around, and we're going to do an exercise based with that. But I wasn't really voiceovers and stuff we already kind of covered last semester, so I wasn't really going to go over that again.
Okay, so I should just refer to last semester's videos.
I mean, yeah, we can talk to him. I don't know, and see what he's.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to bring it in the meeting. I just, since we're talking about layering and that kind of thing, I didn't know if there was something that either I forgot in the last few meetings, or something that we're going to cover about layering sound specifically. But I don't think I can go into more detail because the person just mentioned technical issues. They didn't go into detail about what they were.
Right. So if he's talking about like dubbing another language, that would be the same thing as ADR. It would just be doing it in a different language, trying to match it up as best you can to the people who are speaking, so it looks like it's coming out of their mouth, which obviously it won't because they're speaking another language. But that would be, if he's talking about that, it would be that the video you should show him is the ADR one, because that's the closest thing to dubbing.
ADR one. Gotcha.
Voiceover is different because it depends on where you're putting it in the video. If you've matched it up to your video, if you're doing a voiceover over that video that you recorded, and it doesn't matter how fast or slow it is, or if you actually timed it out to be a big impact, then I feel like the voiceover should come beforehand. But we did also talk about that last semester.
Yeah, and we talked about that last meeting as well. I'm pretty sure me and Mel got in it about like dubbing and subtitles and stuff.
Oh yeah, the subtitles, yeah.
And timing and stuff like that. All right, I'll refer him to that. I just didn't know if it was relevant to this one. Sorry, I didn't mean to get you off track.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah, so the way this thing works, they showed a video of it. It's in the syllabus if anyone's interested. But if you were planning to get something like this, all you do is you like hold down the button until it shows a green light, and it's basically saying that it's the master timecode generator that the rest are going to follow. And then you use the little microphone jack, plug that in, plug it into whatever device, whether it's the separate audio recorder you're using or whether it's your camera. and it will sync that time code to that device, and that it'll start following that time code. And then you sync it to the rest. You have like 1 or 2 or 3 of these devices for each device you're using. So they'll have these little boxes. One will have like a red stripe, one will be yellow, one will be blue. You'll connect those together so that they know what time code to follow. And then you'll connect them to your actual devices like your camera and your audio recorders and everything like that, so that they are following it. Now, when a camera doesn't record its own time code, what actually happens is when you put a time code generator into it, it takes over one of the audio channels. So if your camera records audio, or if it has a microphone jack, then it'll be able to record on the left channel and the right channel of audio. But when you're putting in a time code generator, it's actually going to take over one of those audio channels, and it's inputting information, but it sounds like noise to us, where it sounds like a lot of like clicking and high-pitched noises. So it's very ugly sounding, but that's why you also just want to use your camera as scratch audio instead of using it for the actual video. You can't use this if you're going to try to use your actual camera audio, because it's going to take over your audio and make it sound horrible. The way timecode sounds, anybody can look it up. It sounds very weird and strange, but it helps it helps in post-production for it to be able to recognize where to sync those files up. So because your camera wouldn't have time code like, something like this, and it wouldn't have the information needed to show where to sync it, it puts it into the audio so that the audio file actually has it. And that way the audio can connect to the external devices and everything can still be in sync, but it'll just do it through audio instead of doing it through video. And you also have to be sure that your cables don't ever come out, because if they do, your camera is going to lose that time code and then be out of sync. So you want to make sure that if you're using something like this, you have it in there securely, and that it's not going to, that nobody's like, moving it around too fast to where it's going to yank out that cable and ruin the sync. All right, and then with time code, it's a little bit of a learning curve, because I'm sure like Mel's figuring out with ours. The goal of it's to synchronize everything, but when you're using a separate audio recorder like this, like we did, you have to put it into that software first, its own software. So this Tentacle Sync thing, it has its own Tentacle Sync software that you put it in. You put in the video files, you put in the audio files, and because you were using its device, it input information and metadata into each file so that it can recognize which ones go together and where they start, where they stop together, so that everything's in sync and everything matches. All you do is you take all your video files, put them in, take all your audio files, you put them in, and then it automatically syncs up everything, and it shows you what's synced, and it like shows you what synced perfectly well and what had a problem, and if anything was an issue. Usually if it shows everything's good, then you make what's called XML files. And XML files are kind of like, so the reason you don't want to move your files after you put them into your computer, there's a few reasons. If you're using timecode, you also don't want to move them around, because timecode's using these XML files, which are in themselves, it's just telling it's just like a reference point. XML files aren't actually holding the video and the audio information in itself. It's just saying, hey, if you go this, through this path to the computer, to this file in this folder, you'll find the video file here. And if you go through here to this path in that folder, you'll find the audio file that goes with that video file here. So it's just reference points. It's just showing where those files are. So if later on you're like, oh, I actually don't want my video files in this folder, and you move it to somewhere else, and you make a new folder that's, new video or something, and you put it in, or short film, blah, 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 and you put it in there, the XML file is not going to know where it is. So you'll have to like locate it again and let it know so that it can resync it. But if it doesn't, it's going to be an issue and it's not going to be able to have those files because it's not even going to remember where it is. So that is also something that adds an extra layer of something. You have to do that anyway when you're doing an editing software program because they use project files, which is kind of the same thing. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you just want to be sure that when you're putting your files into your computer, you're keeping them all in the same location whenever you sync them up using something like this, timecode generator, and whenever you're using it in your editing software because it's going to be in a project file.
And back up everything, people. Just back up everything. Like the main thing with the last topic, especially because we're going to talk about it. It was just one of those things where I was like, how do people not back up every single, like I'm such a paranoid over planner type of person that not having backups would freak me out so bad. And the fact that most people are just like, nah, it's fine. What is, like, I'll just import it to my computer and then I'll clear my SD card and like that would freak me out so bad. So yeah, just have backups for everything.
Yes. Yeah, because you don't want your files to go away at any point. You don't want to get them lost and you don't want to delete them. I'm going to get more into this in a second when we talk about project files, because that's the main thing. When it comes to like timecode and sync, like at least you have that slate, hopefully, as a backup, so that if this timecode thing wasn't working out, something went wrong, you're still able to either automatically, actually, you probably, if you're using timecode and your camera didn't have its internal timecode so that the timecode generator is using that audio channel, it's probably not going to be able to automatically sync. Like, let's say the timecode syncing didn't work for some reason or it messed up. Well, whenever you bring it into something like Premiere Pro is not going to be able to use that audio to match it to the video because that audio is going to have that timecode noise in there and it's going to overtake everything. So it won't be able to automatically sync. So you'll have to manually sync everything if it doesn't work, but that's still better than just losing it altogether. Now, whenever you're having project files, that's something else. But if you're having these XML files, that is for the timecode, whenever it syncs those and makes its own files for it, you just want to be sure that you're not messing with any of the source files, the source video, the source audio, because that is what it's using to figure out where to sync it at. So does that make sense, everybody? Like, I know it's a lot of confusing, at least for me. It took me a little second to like get it all down because I had to like rehear it again to make sure I was understanding it correctly.
For me
I'm
too.
hoping I'm
It was,
explaining it correctly.
gosh, it was, guys, it was just such a fun, sexy topic. Honestly, I was just enjoying it so much, listening to it, and so entertained the entire time. I wasn't bored at all. I mean, it's very necessary and it's very important. But it's also one of those things where it's like, wow, this is tedious
Yes.
to watch the person do. So
Yeah, whenever
but
you
it's
first get your
necessary.
files, and if you're the one doing it, if you're working on like a larger set, then you'll have like assistant editors, you'll have DITs, digital imaging technicians, you'll have data wranglers, who will do all this stuff, and you don't really have to worry about it. But if it's just you, or if it's a really small production, you want to make sure the person, if they've never done something like this before, you just want to be sure that they know what they're doing, or that you kind of explain it to them so that you make sure, because you don't want to lose your footage. You don't want it to end up in a spot and someone can be like, I don't know where I put it. I put it in a folder and I put it in the computer, but I can't find it now. That's something you definitely don't want. So doing these extra steps is boring but necessary to make sure everything's organized and will be clear and easy to find later on if something goes wrong or if something goes missing all of a sudden.
That
So,
goes for
don't
most
take extra time to
tasks
do
in
it all.
life, boring but necessary. V said yes, it's helpful. Thank you. And Mouse had written instructions for the software basically, and I'm like, yep.
Yeah, so basically it's just written instructions for where to find the tracks. That's a good way to put it. Yeah, thanks, Mel.
Yeah, I like that.
These little tentacle sync things are really not that expensive. I don't think. At least I was thinking it was going to be more than this. They're like $229 on whatever site, Adorama. That's for one. You're usually going to need like 2 or 3, depending on how many
I
devices.
mean, it's not cheap, but as far as like film
It's cheaper than what I was
goes,
thinking it would be. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I was just making that clear because you're like, it's not expensive. It's just $200 or so each.
I said
Well,
it's
like,
not
I
as
mean,
expensive as I was
as-
thinking.
Yeah.
When I was initially thinking they'd be like 500 to 600 just because everything in video seems like it's more expensive. But
Yeah.
so you'll need a few of them so you can connect one to your audio recorder, connect one to your camera. If you're using more than one camera, you'll need, of course, another one for that. But that way everything's in sync, everything's working, and then you'll just use its software. I will say this brand itself, Tentacle Sync, it only works with Mac. So if you have Windows, I don't think they have a version for that. So, but I'm sure there's other external timecode generators that you could get for Windows that'll do the same thing. And then just the just like for visual reference of like the master and slave audio thing, the timecode generator would be the thing at the top. You would say, this is the timecode you guys all need to follow. That would go to each of those devices. And then those devices would plug into your camera, your audio recorder. Well, actually, unless you're using that for your audio recorder, then you would just plug those into your separate cameras. And that way everything's in sync following that same time.
Ooh, what was that?
I'm not sure.
Did our internet glitch again?
No, I don't think so.
Having some audio sync issues in this very meeting.
Yes, that's what I was
Yeah,
thinking. Like the irony. I heard 2 of you.
So let's see. Someone was saying they were clarifying on one of the things. Timecode and sync are not exactly the same thing. Timecode is technically, it's metadata identifier. It's like putting some metadata into each file so that it can identify which one goes with which. Basically, it'd be like if to make it more simple sounding, it's going to be like saying this file is take 1, this video file is take 1, this audio file is take 1. And that's what timecode is doing, saying this one goes with this one, that one goes with that one. That way later on it can identify them all. And if you're only using something that uses timecode, which these timecode generators don't, but if you're only using timecode, then on a really long take of audio, it can still do that drift. That's why you need to have a clock where every other thing is slaved to it, where it's like one's a central master and the other ones are slaves, so that they're all exactly following that that time code exactly. Like I was saying, every device, especially the cheaper end cameras and things like that, cameras don't really pay as much attention to time code as most of the other stuff, at least not the lower end ones. So they might have time code, but the way that it works, like the frames might eventually get off and be out of place because it's counting 0.00008 seconds less than whatever else. And then eventually, whenever you're like recording a long take, it'll get out of sync and it'll drift, which is why you want to always tell when you're using these kinds of systems, you always want to say this one's the one you follow. That way, no matter what, even if it usually would get out of sync, it would stay connected exactly to that. And that's what genlocking is. So another thing, if you're ever getting a timecode generator, if it says something like it uses LTC, that just means it's using linear timecode. That just means, you know, the day it's using the time of day that it's being recorded at. And that's what most things use now. I'm not sure what the other ones are even. So I've only seen the ones where it shows the time of day. So if you're doing it at 6, like this one on the picture would be doing it at 6:59 a.m. and it's 13 frames in. And then if it was an hour or 2 hours in, it would show that. So actually, no, sorry, that'd be 6 minutes and 59 seconds in, 13 frames. The one all the way to the left would be hours. But anyway, it just shows like the time of day that it's being recorded at. So that's it. And Genlock, which is saying with the master and the slaves to that master, is what synchronizes all the clocks to the same device and makes them all run at the same time. Then there's something called Wordlock, and that's what's used to sync the audio sources. So in conjunction, all three of these things will make everything perfectly synced and make them all syncable in post using that software.
And it's very fun, as you can hear from Coda's very excited tone. Like
It's very
your tone is just
technical. I know this is very
as
technical.
you can hear, it's
Some
blah,
cameras,
blah, blah.
some cinema cameras and things like that already have timecode in them. And then, like I said, some of the audio recorders have timecode in them as well. You would just have to connect them to each other with some cable, or if it is capable of doing so, you could connect it with Bluetooth or something like that wirelessly. And you'd still tell it which one to follow. And you'd probably, I personally would make it always follow the audio recording device, just because that's the easiest thing. That's already going to be on somebody while they're recording. They're going to be walking around with that. So I think it'd be easier to adjust that or check that than it would be if it was just on your camera, because the camera's going to be moving around all over the place. But yeah, you'll still connect it together. On big, huge like sitcoms and things like that, they'll have one camera or one device where they have these huge long cables going out where they connect them through cables. Cables probably work a tiny bit better, but I would say if you're not doing huge long takes and things like that, especially if you're not doing multi-cam setups, then anything would really work as long as you just tell it which timecode to follow. So this is the master, follow this device. And then once you plug it in, it says, okay, I'm following that. And there you go, it's synced up. And then you'll have synced files later on. So does anyone have any questions or comments on that stuff?
Did you go over the differences between recording at 44 and 48? I came late.
For the audio?
Yes.
Yeah, I use 96 and 48, but yeah. Just that it can
So-
drift apart and it can have audio drift.
Yeah, at 44, I know 44, 48 is, I know anything 48 is what you want to look for when you're doing video. So if you're going into your audio recorder and you're seeing these different numbers, 48 is the one you want to go with because that's gonna match up with your camera. 44 is more of a, it's not that it sounds any different, it's just more of a condensed because it's trying to save storage space, I guess, because with 48, it's counting each individual frame.
Mhm.
And audio is not really counting any frames, so it doesn't really need to do that. So that's the difference. That's why you get that drift from 44.1 to 48. So just know, like, if you're setting up and you're not sure and you see all these numbers in your recorder and you're like, which one do I do? 48 is the safe video standard for video. So if you're recording at 44, chances are you're going to get a drift. Chances are. It's not that it's going to sound bad. It's not going to match up evenly. You're going to have a harder time latching it up.
Question, when is 96 used and why?
I have no idea. Film school only taught me the differences between 44 and, and 48. 46,
add
I
that
have
to the
no
research
idea what
list?
that number is coming from, but yeah, you're going to have to look that one up. I don't know.
Should I add that to the list of stuff to look up?
Yeah, I'll look it up at some point. I was just wondering because I know it's
Okay.
there and I was just like, I don't know, it's like a bigger file. Like, is it just, I don't know if it gives any extra like information or any clarity or any room to edit or what it does. So I was just curious to see if you knew.
No, it's just a time thing because cameras are recording in frames.
Mhm.
So that's how that time measurement is counted in frames. That time code is synced with that. And 44 is not, because sound is technically faster than light. So it's faster, I guess. So they don't really need to count frames, so they can condense it a little
No,
bit
it's
more.
not.
You don't think so?
No, light is faster.
I heard sound was faster than light.
No,
Alright,
like
let me go
when
to
you
that.
when you see an explosion, like you see the flash first, and then you don't hear
I
it
was
until later. I
thinking
mean,
that
that's
too,
what
but-
lightning is. Like you see the flash of lightning, and then the thunder happens like 4 seconds later.
Wait
That
a
is
minute,
true because we can break the sound barrier, but we can't break light barrier.
All right, the speed of light as it travels through air and space is much faster than that of sound. It travels at 300 million meters per second of 273-400 miles per hour.
I would say it might be. I would say it
Speed
might
of
be
light,
that.
I'm not done. Speed of light in a vacuum and air, 300 million miles, or 2,703, 400 miles per hour. There, I'm done now.
All right, I would say that it's probably that the audio for like filmmaking is going faster. That's why using audio units in the editing software would be a little more precise because there's a little bit more information there than the frames because you're shooting, especially if you're shooting film at 24 frames per second, it's not exact same in audio. It's not shooting like, per frame. It's not going to be exactly the same. It's not going to line up perfectly, which is why I was
it probably is referring to
showing
in
like
video.
Like this, you might not have it be exactly above and below each other each time. That might be a slightly, just very slightly to the right or to the left, even though they were recorded at the same time, just because of the way it was working.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to like
No, it's fine.
snap back at you. Even Rafa in the comments like, oof.
Yeah, maybe I just didn't understand within the context.
Yeah, I didn't mean it like that.
Yeah,
Like,
maybe
shut
I
up, I'm
was
not
just I was just looking at Google. The most common reason audio and video gets out of sync is due to audio processing speed. Audio often processes a lot faster than video,
There
particularly
we
when it
go.
comes to 4K
Okay.
videos.
There we
High
go.
resolution video files take up a lot of space, and as a result, it can take longer to process a video signal than an audio signal.
Gotcha.
Well, there you go.
There we
There
go.
you go.
The
Uncle
sound
Okay,
is
processing
faster, but
speed,
when
thank
we're
you.
talking about video. Sound is faster, but only when we're talking about it in this context.
in processing speed, yes.
Yeah.
But we were talking about this context, but it's good to clarify. It's good to clarify. It's just playing devil's advocate on both sides here.
But
All
yeah,
right.
okay. So 48 is what you would choose in most circumstances. I'll look up 96 and see what's up with that. But 48,
So I should.
I have
add
heard
it, you're
48
going
as
to?
well. Everybody always says that, but I was just like, what's 96 for?
So you're going to add it? I shouldn't.
I was
You
going to
got
look it up after the meeting, honestly.
Okay, so you got it.
I've been curious about it.
Because I'm making notes. I don't know if what I should also be looking up this weekend and what I shouldn't. That's why I asked.
Gotcha. All right, I'll look it up and get with you guys next meeting about it.
Gotcha.
But does anyone else have any questions or comments about syncing audio with video? The manual way, automatic way, time code.
It
way.
sounds boring, annoying, and nerve-wracking. That's my comment.
It's not nerve-wracking if you do it right. It is boring and it can be annoying, especially if it messes up. That's why you want to make sure everything's good and good to go. The slate is clear. You can see it. You can hear it. You're recording audio and video before you use Slate. I've heard of times where they don't record. They forget to record one or the other. Usually it's the audio. They forget to record the audio on some productions, the lower ones usually. And then
always have multiple files. Oh, that's another thing that I think is important. And we've already mentioned this like a million times. Have multiple sound files, like record it in multiple different mics, record it in different things. That's important too. Don't forget that.
Yeah, well, that's
that's
just for sound. Like if you're recording it
No, I
all
know,
to
but I'm just saying, like, if let's say that's still important, because let's say you're going to upload the file and you find out it's corrupted for whatever reason, or that particular device didn't record well. You have another one.
Yes.
Yay. So yeah, just
in case you're using a
Just
lav
in
mic
case.
on an actor and the battery dies, you still have your boom mic, you still have your in-camera audio for a reference point for scratch, and you can sync it all up. But yeah, for whatever reason they do the slate and then like they start recording the audio afterward, if you have somebody that doesn't know what they're doing, then it's not going to sync up. It's not going to, you're not even going to know where to sync it up. It's going to be a lot harder to figure it out because you don't even have that slate in the audio. So you always want to be sure you're recording everything first and then do the slate for each take. And then
someone even mentioned, like, if you don't have a slate, clap or have like, I remember when me and Coda filmed the intro video, that's awful by the way, but when we filmed it, I think I look awful in it, but when we filmed it, and sometimes we would do multiple takes of this, like on the same, I always forget guys, you know, I suck at terms, but when we were still rolling and we'd take it again from the top, instead of like slating it again, we'd put like a number 2 or a number 3 in front to show that it was like the same take, but we're trying it again. Or we'd like clap it. Gosh, at some points Coda would clap that stupid clapperboard in front of my face. Soft sticks is soft sticks for a reason, people, for goodness sake. But yeah, so they said if you don't have a clapperboard, which I hope people do, but like sometimes not everyone does, you know, they're editing like a smaller video or something like that. Just something to where that sound will, you can explain it better than me, honey. I don't want to say stupid stuff.
Something distinguishable so that you can use it in the audio. You definitely want to use a Slate if you have it, if you have the ability to buy one. They're not that expensive, but if you don't have it, or if you're doing something really quick and you don't have time for whatever reason, doing a quick clap in front of the camera can also work, because it'll still have this spike in the audio and it'll still have the visual of you clapping.
Yes.
And that's what they're talking about.
You could also buy, well, not buy, but you can go on YouTube right now and type in digital slate, and it'll make a high pitched noise for you, like on your phone.
I've seen that.
Oh yeah.
They also have the Timecode Slate, which is which shows the time code. You can connect that to everything else as well, so you can see the time code in the frame on the video as well as, you know, in all the devices. But I'm not really sure how much those are. I'm pretty sure it's like 100 or something, 150, 200. But yeah, there's these digital slates now. That
you said the Timecode Slate?
Yeah.
That mess is expensive for no reason. It's like $500-600. Almost. No, I think
What?
it's like almost.
Holy
Yeah,
crap.
it's expensive. It is expensive.
Mel, Slate is clapperboard.
For a digital thing?
Yep.
Can't you make that, Shiz? Like, what the heck?
It's expensive.
It comes down to, like, at the end of the day, like, you can make as much stuff as you want, but it's also time too. So like it comes down to my idea is, like, when you work on big stuff, everyone gets really good in like certain areas, and then they have all of the high-end equipment for their job, and then that's when it's like exchange, right? So
it just means since it's a digital program, it doesn't seem like it's that complex of a thing.
You'd be
to be like
surprised.
$500 worth for a digital slate thing.
Well,
it also has to be very reliable, because if that thing ever messes up, then nobody's gonna buy it, because they're using it for it to be very precise. So
that's true. That's true.
It does more than just count too. So it syncs up to your devices. So when it slates, it inserts that time code into your footage for you. It does other things. Since we're on the topic of time code and syncing sound and stuff, that's pretty much. So when you see it in the movies and stuff, and they do the soft sticks. I'm gonna digress real quick. I cannot stand soft sticks, by the way. Like, it drives me nuts. Just clap it for the love of God. Just
at least then get away from the person's face.
When you do the soft sticks, here's the thing. When you do the soft sticks, like you soft sticks and you just a slight. The line is so small, it gets so hard, because I don't have the even the software you use to sync it. It has a hard time because it's looking for that, and then when it can't find it, like that is just clap like
Then get it farther from the person's face. Okay, that's all I'm saying. Because for goodness freaking sakes, Coda's like, he was like, okay, time for the other one. Literally in front of my face, like 2 inches, and the thing would clap, and my ears are already dude, I'm literally blind. I cannot. My hearing is sensitive. No, I am blind. I'm legally blind. So
okay, I was gonna say.
I'm legally blind. So like my ears are more sensitive, and you get that thing 2 inches from my face clapping in my ear. Oh my God.
Well, you don't have to. Here's the thing. See, that's the thing about learning and a learning experience. So you don't have to clap it in somebody's face. You can point the camera away, clap it, and then bring the camera back. Like, you don't have to.
No, yeah, Mel, what we're gonna do is we're just like, okay, wait a minute. I'll get the earmuffs, I'll put them on, and then I'll be like, okay, clap it. And then he'll do it. And then I'll take it out.
No, but yeah, Brian's right. Like on some, like you won't even be near the thing. They'll just point the camera to you. They'll even change the focus on
No,
some
yeah, but,
productions
like,
just to
in
get that slate in view, and then they'll go back
Yeah.
and re.
But I
focus
know that
to
in
the
ours,
acting.
in our short film, for example, like we were in front of the actor because that's how close the camera was. So at times we did have to do soft sticks, and I'm sorry for the editors, like Mel.
For
I'm
anyone that
sorry.
doesn't know, soft sticks is just whenever you, instead of slapping the slate together hard, you just do it really soft so that because you're right in front of somebody's face. So you don't want to make it too loud for the actor and get them out of character, or just to hurt their ears or accidentally hit their nose or something like that. So
Yeah, so
that's
I'm
what soft
sorry,
sticks
Mel.
is. It's like just barely clicking it together.
Yeah, I'm
But
sorry, Mel,
anyway.
if that's going to be hard for you. I'm really sorry.
Anyway,
And,
this is a time code generator
Wait,
slate.
did he want to finish something? Sorry,
Oh
I
no,
cut you off.
you got it. You're pulling it. I was just gonna say that when you clap this one, like it links up with other devices and it starts to count there, so it helps it sync it a lot better. So that counter
Ah.
right there, you're looking at these counters, is counting in hours, minutes, and seconds and stuff. So you can look at that when you're editing. You could see those numbers like right before he claps. You can see those numbers, and you can go on your timeline and just link it up through the numbers that way.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what that's
All
for.
right. All right. Last thing, honey, I would also like to apologize because I was talking about hearing and I just realized that I spoke really, really loud. And if anyone's wearing earbuds, like everything was quiet and normal. And then out of nowhere, my voice went super loud. And sometimes it does that. And I'm really sorry for those of you that were like normal and then, and yeah, I'm sorry about that. I'm working on it. Okay.
And looking at this though, even on B&H, like
Yeah.
it's $1,600,
So
$1,679 for this.
So if you
Jeez.
go on set and you see that, you can say, "Oh man, I've made it to Hollywood because they got this expensive ass clapper."
That's how you know you made it.
The
Yeah.
money that the people in the lower budget spend on their camera, they spent on this slate. I made it.
Whew.
Yeah. But yeah,
Oh.
that's a digital slate, everybody.
Let me go through. So you see on the go back, if you don't mind,
Yeah,
to
go
the
ahead.
picture. You see on the left, it has roll, scene, take. Roll, scene, and take. Like a lot of this stuff is not even important, depending on how big your project is. And a lot of it, like the slate is like outdated. Like it's talking about roll. We don't really use film that much anymore. I mean, you can put a memory card number on there to tell you what memory card you're using, but you really don't see like what scene you're shooting. Like that's not really important because it is important, but I don't know. Like I see so many people fighting so hard to try to keep these clappers up to date with information on there, and it's just like when I'm editing, I'm like I don't pay attention to any of that because it's like everything is there for you. You have a thumbnail, you can see what scene it is. It has on the bottom what night scene, day scene, like you can see all of that. So like a lot of this stuff was pertaining to like actual film production when you can't see the footage playback. So
Mhm.
like when you're going back, you can say, oh, this is that scene and this is this and this, whatever. But now everything is then moved up to digital. So it's a lot more easier to identify what scene, what file and all that stuff goes where. But a lot of these clappers are like, even this one with the fancy counters, like to me, it's still kind of like out of date. Like there's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I get you. I think scene and take are like really important, but the rest is kind of just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It depends on how many productions you're doing, I guess. So you need to know what production it is. And I guess if you have multiple
Yes.
directors, you need to know which
Well,
ones.
that's true. Yeah, definitely, exactly. So it's like especially if you're doing like a lot of like shorter stuff, you're gonna be it starts to like, it seems like when you're like, it's your first ever one, it's super easy to memorize everything, but then after a while, it's like you're working on tons of stuff and it's going really well. And yeah, it makes sense as well. So
And I think MOS is important too, to show like if you're not editing it yourself, then you're sending it off to somebody else, or if you're sending it off to another team, so that they know not to look for an audio file. They know there's not something missing. Things like that I think are important. But I would say, yeah, roll if it's not like talking about what, I mean, I guess like you said, you could do a memory card, whichever memory card is used or something like that. But yeah, I think I agree that some of the stuff needs to be kind of updated.
Needs to be updated, sorry?
Yeah, like some of the information, like roll should be changed to something about memory cards or something like that. And I feel like there should be some slates have more information on them, some don't. It just depends what you're using it for.
Yeah, that's true. But I guess like they keep it standard, right? So, and that's also nice. Because then if they updated it, then you know what I mean, then it would be a huge, huge thing. It would have to be updated across the board for every huge studio.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why things are like slowly updated through film. When new things.
Yeah, I mean, like certain things like high end like equipment for like certain shots, those are going to be updated the most frequently, but they're like only rented out on like the huge budget stuff. The stuff that's more standard, such as a slate, would create a bigger deal to be updated, right?
Mm-hmm.
In from what I know of it.
Right. All right. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about syncing?
No, sorry I was late. Sorry for this meeting today.
Fine.
What did
Okay.
we to recap the syncing really quickly?
We're just talking about how to sync footage with audio with video. You can either do it manually, you can do it automatically. You just have to have a scratch track that's
Yeah,
recorded
scratch.
to your camera, as well as the separated audio, and then timecode as the industry standard for the bigger budget stuff and everything that they use to make sure everything's completely in sync.
That makes sense.
All right. So now we're going to talk about cameras real quick. We're just talking about. Oh, go
One
ahead.
second.
I would like to add with the syncing process and the slate, slating process, usually they have like a camera log. And in the camera log, the information from the slate also goes in there. So they have, when you're actually organizing your clips from day-to-day basis, you put in the camera log and you have that sync information on the slate. So that kind of helps the person who's organizing all the clips to, be kind of organized in the way he could give it to the editor, who's essentially going through the clips, and he basically takes the slate information out and he would just have the clip.
Okay, so when it goes to the editor, so you have the slate information at the top, which includes the sound information, so that when it goes to
Right.
the
so the editor sometimes don't really want to look at the slate information. They would just go with straight up, the clip assembly.
The clip assembly?
But
like how it's labeled at the top?
Yes, how it is labeled at the top. And
Yeah,
it
so
goes on a day-to-day basis, right? So they put it in only when they figure out that, okay, there is something wrong with some clip. That's when they would go cross-reference with the slate head, because slate would be on the clips in a separate location. And that links with the camera log. So when the editor is basically looking at the clips, he's basically going with the camera log and he says, okay, these are the clips which are there for that particular day. But the slate information, he doesn't really care too much. But, only when you're getting to a point where you are doing color correction and color grading, at that point, you would be looking at the focal length information, which is also there on the slate. And, exposure information is also there on the slate. But for the editor, he's just basically relying on the clips directly. This is how, kind of helps.
That's fine. It's just a quick question. So as you're recording sound, you're labeling each clip as it goes through on the day.
Right. Yeah. So the dailies, it comes from film kind of production where you had the dailies. So you had the dailies for each day. So the bins are also created for each day when you're actually capturing all, dumping all the data from the camera and also from the audio recorder. So they kind of create different bins. And the only way you can sync the sound and the camera is basically through the camera log, which says this late information is related to so and so time code. So that's how it links up the two things. So when you're actually putting the clip and then putting the sound in, you're relying on that log information and then putting the sync together for each one of them. I mean, these days, the syncing process is done automatically. Most of the software, you give all the daily clips and daily audio. They will figure it out, and then they will put the sync based on the time, provided the time code is there, for both of them. Yeah.
Makes sense.
But
So
yeah,
it's
that's
not
another
simpler
thing
than
to
what
think
it
about
used
as
to be.
well, because on a long form content like a film, they're going to be shooting, anywhere from 10 to 30 days or more. And so they need to have some kind of organized workflow. And they usually have, multiple people working. One person, the data wrangler, takes it, he offloads it and backs it up. DIT takes it and he adjusts the stuff in the camera, and then he gives it off to the data wrangler. And then the editor, there's an assistant editor that kind of assembles everything, make sure everything's good and synced, and then they organize it in bins and files and folders and all that. And then the editor themselves kind of just have the footage, like Vish is saying. So in a larger production with more crew, you have all this workflow because you're constantly getting new footage each day. And so you don't want to confuse day 3 with day 30. And you need to make sure all that data is there, and the metadata and the labeling and everything's correct. So they'll be doing that over and over again each day. They'll do their specific role. And the more higher up you get in production, the more specified the roles get, so that everyone's very responsible for one certain thing, so that nothing goes wrong because everybody's looking out for each individual part of the workflow. And if
Exactly.
something does go wrong, you can say, hey, you were supposed to do this, what happened? And then it's, you can figure out who caused that problem. And if it's a recurring issue, or if it's, something very important, then, hey, we can't have you here. You got to get out of here because you just messed up the day's work. So.
And also, I think what happens is the later you go into the post-production editing and sound mixing and the color correction, at that time you generate so many files, it becomes really difficult for you to go back to the origin source. So being organized right at the beginning and following through that organization really helps in the long run, because it really clears up a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, it's little thing which is often kind of overlooked. We just don't pay attention, but it's so crucial. It saves you a lot of time in the later point.
definitely. I would say even like on the lower stuff, like especially if you're doing a documentary film, because you're going to have a ton of extra footage than you're going to use, or if you're just doing a narrative short film or something like that, being organized from the very beginning and making sure everything's named and properly put into separate folders and that it's easily accessible. I would say make it so easy that if you were to give it to someone without explaining anything to them, they would be able to figure out what the file is and be able to edit with it. Because, just in case anything happens, you'll be able to easily find it. You'll be able to easily access it. If you lose track of it, you'll be able to look up the data, type it in, and figure it out where it's located now in your computer. Things like that. So you always want to be sure to just make it as clear and as simple as possible, so that if anything does happen, or if you do end up getting another editor, they're going to easily be able to find everything, and it's going to be a very quick turnaround rate for them having to learn, instead of like figuring out what your workflow was and where everything's at, where it's all located. They'll easily be able to see it and find it and put it all together. All right. So we're going to be talking a little bit about cameras and the different kinds. Now there's more cameras out there than we're going to be using in filmmaking, really. I would say the 3 main ones in filmmaking are mirrorless cameras, DSLRs, or cinema. And with the biggest ones being cinema cameras, of course, because they're made specifically for that, but they are the more expensive ones. And we'll talk about some pros and cons of each. There are a few other kinds of cameras. There's compact cameras, bridge cameras, but though, and like action cameras, kind of like GoPro, but those are used more for like specific things like vlogs and just like point and shoot and photography more often, especially with the bridge camera. I'll talk a little bit about them, but since we're mainly focused on narrative works and things like that, we're going to be talking more about the mirrorless DSLR versus cinema. So mirrorless and DSLR, first of all, they're essentially pretty much the same thing. I mean, they're very similar. The way they're designed is very different though. And so it actually affects a few things, which we'll talk about. Mirrorless cameras. Let me see if I can find it. No, that's it. All right, mirrorless cameras. They're usually smaller and lighter than DSLRs. There you go. They're usually smaller and lighter. They don't have as much stuff on the inside. They're called mirrorless because they don't have this mirror design that DSLRs use, which I'll show in a second. Actually, I'll show it right here. So the way a DSLR works, on the left, the light goes into the camera, it hits off of a mirror, goes up, hits off of another mirror, and goes around and out through the viewfinder. And that's what you're seeing when you're looking at it. You're seeing the light reflected off of the mirror, going up, reflecting again, and into your eye. With a mirrorless camera, it's mirrorless, so there is no mirror there. The light goes directly into the sensor. And that allows it to be a lot smaller and more compact because it doesn't have that mechanism, that system inside of it. The way the DSLR would work is whenever you take a photo or you're shooting video, that mirror is going to lift up and let the light into the sensor, creating that digital image. And the mirrorless one will just have it go straight to the sensor, which is good for the most part, but it can be a little riskier whenever you're changing lenses and things like that. And I'll get to that in a second. But those are the insides of the cameras, which is why you'll see that the mirrorless are often a lot smaller looking. They're smaller, lighter, they're quieter because they're not using that mechanism to lift and lower that mirror system. They can usually have faster frames per second because the frames per second isn't dictated on that mirror opening and closing over and over again. They have an electronic viewfinder, so it's not that reflected light coming off of a mirror, it's just an electronic one. But their cons, DSLRs typically have a better battery life. And they can be a bit pricier than DSLRs. They both have interchangeable lenses, which is good. They allow you to use different lenses for different needs, different shooting scenarios. So that's always good to have more. But that means you'll have to be you'll have to bring around multiple lenses to any set you're shooting at or anything you're doing. You're gonna have to bring around a pack of lenses, which are also gonna be more expensive because you're gonna have to carry those around. But the versatility they give, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Just thinking like, yeah, because once you have like the camera that you like to shoot all of the time, then you get all the lenses that you like to shoot with all of the time, and you're working with it, you know, decently often to going to all of the shoots and stuff. So that makes sense. I mean, you think about it like all the film gear, like, oh, that's crazy, that's so much, but it's like it's not all done by one person. That's insane on the big shoots. So yeah,
right.
It's kind of like things to think about because it can, for me, I don't know, sometimes you like feel like, oh, so much equipment, but it's like, yeah, there is, but like it makes sense. I don't know, just kind of throwing some.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of equipment and it does get very specialized the further you look into it. When we're going to be going over a bunch of it, this is a more so the mirrorless and the DSLR. Obviously, these aren't like most likely they're not going to be used on any kind of bigger budget production. They're going to be using the cinema cameras and the bigger, bulkier, more professionalized cameras. These ones are more often for like a low budget option, an independent film or a short film or somebody's first project or student projects, just because they're a lot cheaper than the cinema alternative, which we'll talk about in a minute too. They have the interchangeable lenses just like DSLRs. Both of them can change their lenses. They often offer less camera shake than a DSLR because of the way a DSLR is designed. The light's reflecting off of an internal mirror mechanism and then going around. And so there's usually more camera shake involved because of that, because of the opening and closing of that mirror. There's a little bit more movement happening with inside the camera itself, and that can cause some more camera shake when you're shooting video. So the mirrorless is a little bit of a better option for those circumstances. But the mirrorless is also newer, so they do have less lenses available right now at the moment than a DSLR. And they also will have, depending on which camera you get, they're going to have a different lens mount. So these lens mounts, this silver ring you see on the camera on the left, that will be a different size depending on which camera you're getting, what brand, and that'll determine what kind of lenses you can get. Some cameras allow you to also get an adapter that connects to that thing so that it can hold different kinds of lenses, but many of them right now just allow whatever kind of lens they allow at the moment. Like I know Canon, for instance, they have EF and I know they have EF lenses and EFS, I think, and then like R or something. And basically that's just the kind of lenses that you can put on the camera. Some third parties make them. Canon makes them to that size so that they fit their cameras, of course. And so you can buy those lenses, or you can buy the third-party lenses that are made specifically for that to attach to your camera. But if you were to get another camera, like a mirrorless camera, and try to use those same lenses, more than likely it's not going to fit because it's going to be a different size. So just keep that in mind. And because there's a different size and mirrorless is newer, they oftentimes have far less lens choices available than the DSLR alternative. Now, whenever you're using a mirrorless camera, because of the way it works, because of the way that the light goes directly to the sensor, it's a good thing to have not as much stuff in the way and all of that. But when you're changing that lens, it's a little more, it can be more of an issue because it's exposed. The sensor is directly exposed. With a DSLR, it has that mirror in front of it. So if a piece of like a particle of dust or direct sunlight were to go inside of that camera while you're trying to change that lens, it would hit off that mirror first. So it's less likely to cause any damage. But, or, you know, a raindrop gets in or something like that, it's less likely. It's still bad, but it's less likely to cause a problem than on a mirrorless camera where it's going directly to the sensor. So then you got a particle of dust that hits that sensor, and now you got dust on your sensor, which is very annoying and hard to notice until you get it into the editing room, and then you see there's a speck of dust, and it's very
Oh, that would be the worst. Because can you imagine just like I have everything and that fucking dust ruined every single shot. Like on
Yeah.
a big shoot, like on our minor stuff, you'd be like, oh, we could pass it off. But like on like, you know, this is going like on like TVs across the world. You're gonna be like, we have to reshoot everything. Oh my god, how did we miss this?
Yeah,
Right.
so Raphael was asking like, oh, so mirrorless is preferable. It really depends. Like to some people, yeah.
Most
For me,
people
for
say from what I've heard, most people say that for video purposes, mirrorless is definitely preferable. I've never had a mirrorless, so I'm not sure. I've used a compact camera, a camcorder, a cinema camera, and a DSLR at one point, but I've never used mirrorless, so I can't really say.
Well,
And of
here's
course, it also depends on which one you're getting. Sorry, go ahead.
we're kind of going the the whole DSLR is kind of like shifting, and that's the direction it's going to. So like, it's not necessary. I mean, well, it's not about being the more preferred, but it's just going to be that way at some point where every camera is going to be mirrorless.
Okay.
Yeah, it might just be like, for example, back then, we needed the light to bounce off the mirror, to bounce off the whatever. And
No,
now
it was
it's a lot
just
more-
that was always just a technique that was used to produce the image. They've gotten rid of it because they found out that, hey, if we do it this way, we can produce a far superior image that way. So more and more cameras are adapting. It's not that,
But
and you're
there's
gonna
also
have you're still gonna have your old heads that are still like, oh, you know, back in the day, you know, I shoot, you know, with, you know, mirrored cameras and da. But you're never gonna hear somebody say that it's gonna produce the better image, because it's just the direction we're going in. It's like with cars now, if you're still driving an old car that pushes out all these emissions, you know, you'll never see a car. I mean, you'll still see like a whole bunch of old cars, but the whole thing is now everything is going electric. And it's kind of like that sense where, you know, we're kind of shifting into, you know, it's not necessarily that, you know, it's just we found better solutions and better resolutions with the mirrorless, and that's the direction it's going to. So at some point, DSLR will be obsolete. Well, I'm not going to even say that either, but that's a bold statement. But that's just the direction we're
Yeah,
going
because
in.
people still use camcorders, and those are considered, you know.
Yeah,
But
you guys, we've had this discussion. I come from that era. Like when I first started, like back in 2010, I was coming in as DSLRs were being introduced to the industry, and people, you know, people were against DSLRs when they first came out because they were photography cameras, specifically photography cameras that had the ability to take video.
Yeah.
And a lot of video professionals were against it because, like, you know, it just looked ridiculous showing up to a video shoot. You have this photography camera, you know what I mean? But then,
yeah,
you know, people kind of got, the whole thing was that made it crazy. And Canon started the whole thing because it was like, at first you had cameras that could take video, but the videos were trash compared to the actual pictures that the cameras took.
and
when
then there was
7D
like the
came out,
30-minute ones, which is
5D
still the case in a lot, right?
Say what?
They only record for 30 minutes. There's
Yeah,
some
even
that still do
less
that.
than that. When they first started making those cameras, they would only record for like 10 minutes at a time. And
Oh wow.
I mean, some of them still do. Some of them actually do. Like my Nikon, I have a first generation 7D, not a 7D, but a D7000. And that only records for 15 minutes at a time. I have to stop it. And once it hits that 15-minute mark, I have to reset it. The 7D and the original 5D, I think it was the same thing too. It could only record. But the thing was, like, people were so amazed by this camera because for the first time it could take video that actually looked almost as good as the pictures that it took. Because that was the thing. Those cameras take really, really good pictures, but the video was not so great. But then when the 7D and the 5D came out, it was like, oh, well, you have this camera, and then you can use lenses. Because back in the day, your options for cameras were only video cameras or film cameras. And film is very, very expensive. So everybody was trying to make short films on video cameras, and video cameras were trash back in the day because like I think like there was no affordable option for filmmakers back in the day, because if you wanted a really, really good video camera, you'd have to spend at least $6,000-8,000 on a really, really good, and that's an ENG camera, which is electronic news gathering camera. It's meant for news and live broadcasting and stuff. So those were really, really expensive. And then the cheaper ones were like, they just really had really, really bad, really grainy, you know, all this, you know, the Panasonic's 100s and the lower end Sony CR, I don't remember the name, but those cameras were like really, really bad. So it's like your options were either dish out a whole bunch of money on a camera that was meant for news and try to get good, you know, footage with it, or you can dish out even more money on getting film and a film camera and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that was the whole DSLR thing. DSLR, oh, I can get really, really good images and I can use lenses and stuff too. That was the thing. Video cameras didn't have, you know, the cheaper ones didn't have interchangeable lenses for options and stuff like that.
Right.
Like the
Yeah.
really expensive ones. And then lenses themselves, like for video cameras back in the day, on the, you know, a news lens is like almost as much as a car. Them things were super expensive. So that was the whole thing about the DSLRs. It was like, oh, you know, you can do that. And then, you know, they started making DSLRs that were more geared on the film side. And then they came out with the cinema cameras. And then the cinema cameras kind of took off where the mirrorless cameras were going off. But the whole mirrorless thing is mainly for the overall image. Because, you know, when you talk about DSLRs, you're talking about in a board meeting, you have 15, you have in a board meeting out of 100 people in a room, you have 25% of those, you know, 25 of those people in that room are part of the video department for that camera. Everybody else is focused on photography,
Yeah.
and you only have 25
Right.
people focused on video. That's not a lot. So like when DSLRs came out and they started noticing people were buying the cameras, they're like, hey, let's like make this bigger. So now you have 50-50. You have 50 people thinking about video and 50 people thinking about photography. Now you have mirrorless cameras because now they're like, okay, let's focus on getting the image a lot better. And then that's where we shifted off. Now we're going into the cinema revolution, where now everybody's jumping ship again and leaving the mirrorless. Well, the cinema cameras technically are mirrorless, but the difference between the cinema cameras and the mirrorless cameras is that the cinema cameras are 100% dedicated to the video aspect, to the film aspect of it, as opposed to the mirrorless, which is, like I said before, it's like, it's technically at the end of the day, it's meant for photography. It
Right.
just wasn't built to handle the workload that the film cameras are just designed to do.
Yeah, a lot of people complain a lot about the fact that DSLRs and even mirrorless, they're still pumping out cameras that only record for 30 minutes. And they're like, really?
Yeah.
But
You
my
know,
thing with the mirrorless right now is just how sensitive it is. I mean, I know cinema cameras are as well, like the delicateness of changing lenses and all that, making sure that dust doesn't come in, making sure that all that stuff. But for me, that's getting into photography now and can't see very well. The fear of like dust coming in or like ruining my camera because of, especially if it's I guess for me coming from more of a photography aspect, it would be like I'd be taking my camera out a lot and changing lenses more and all that kind of thing. So I guess for the photography aspect, the mirrorless still worries me in that sense. In the sense of like, will I be able to take it around places and switch lenses and not have to worry about dust
Or
coming in or
here's the
stuff
thing
like
about
that?
that. So if you've ever seen, like, if you've ever been, well, of course you've been to weddings, but a lot of photographers, they
I
carry
had one.
they carry multiple cameras. Like you'll see, like some of them have like 2 and 3 cameras attached to the body, just so
Yeah.
they don't have to switch lenses, so they can just automatically pull out the camera and take the
Oh, that's
picture.
true.
That's
But
smart.
my biggest thing about the DSLR when it first came out, because like I was a hater too. My biggest problem with
I'm
the
not a hater.
I'm
Don't
just
put
saying, I
words in
was
my mouth.
no, because I had mentioned like when they first came out, people like, not you, but people were so against DSLRs when they first were introduced. And my biggest concern, my biggest gripe against them was because with video, like if you're indoors, you can plug your camera in and have unlimited amount of time, no battery, no nothing.
Yeah.
But with DSLR, it's like like I said, those are photography cameras. So photographers don't really have to rely on batteries that much because they can shoot all day. Like when
Yeah.
I do photography, like I can go for a couple days without having to switch batteries, just
Well,
doing
that's a
pictures.
thing. They say that
When I
the
switch to the
DSLR's
video,
batteries are not as good. I mean, the mirrorless are not as good as the DSLR because they're lighter and their battery doesn't last as long. And
I mean, video. If you're shooting video, it's gonna drain battery anyway, regardless of mirrorless or DSLR. Ultimately a mirrorless is a DSLR just without the mirror. They're the same thing.
yeah,
But it's just the process of getting the image is different. That's literally
Yeah.
all it is.
for
But
me, it would just
my
have
biggest
to
thing
be
was the battery.
a
The
little more
battery.
bright.
It's like you
Yeah.
had to rely on the battery of that. You couldn't plug it in. You couldn't do any of that stuff. So you had to buy multiple batteries when you're doing video with it. And that was like my biggest, but you know, we've all like adapted to it. And then the third parties came out and they made cheaper batteries and stuff like that. But yeah, at the end of the day, a DSLR is a photography camera. It takes really, really good video. It could be used to, I mean, I've seen DSLR
But that's
footage.
the thing. So if it's a photography camera and a mirrorless is just as delicate as a cinema camera, to where if you switch lenses, you got to be careful and not get dust in it, and it can be easily ruined and blah blah blah, then it is kind of scary to like walk around with it and change lenses and all that kind of thing. It would require an investment of multiple cameras, like you said, or just maybe waiting to see if it gets an upgrade and becomes a little less delicate.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it
No,
is
it'll
still
never
like,
become less
you don't wanna
delicate
screw it
because
up.
it has the sensor exposed that way, because that's how
Yeah.
it gets the better image. So that's
I mean, the sensor could become more persistent, couldn't it, over time?
not if you want good images. How are you gonna get the light to hit it the same way if
Yeah,
you're trying to
I
put
know.
stuff in front of it?
You're right. That was stupid. But yeah, that's the thing, and that's my hesitation with mirrorless right now, because I feel like it could probably be great for a photographer that doesn't move around very much, like
Yeah.
like if you work in a studio, or if you shoot at one stable location and you're not switching lenses very much, or if you use just one primary lens. I feel like it wouldn't be as much of an issue. But for versatility, for me, in my opinion, obviously, I'm not a hater, but this is just my opinion and my experience so far. It for me, I would have trouble just because if I want to switch lenses or if I want to go to multiple places, it would be kind of scary. I would constantly have that fear in the back of my mind.
It's
Yeah.
really not that big of a deal. I have a mirrorless camera. I have 3 actually, and I really, yeah. When I change lenses, I make sure that the sensor is pointing towards at a certain angle so that the dust doesn't fly in or anything like that. And then I just do it real quick, just a swap.
So it's a bit of a learning curve, but once you get it, you're a little more confident.
And then then you have to also pay attention to your surroundings. Like when I went to when I was deployed, I did not bring my camera with me. Some people did, some other photographers did, and I was just like, ew, gross. And they're like, what's wrong? I was like, there's a dust storm every 5 minutes. You could stand there and get covered in dust. You know what I mean? So you have to pay attention. Like if you're in an area where there's a lot of wind and it's like a dusty area, yeah, then you might want to say, maybe I should step outside and change my lens. But like, I don't know, just to have a fear of changing a lens is kind of, it's a little bit too much.
Fear. I'm just saying for someone who, like for me personally, who I won't be able to pay attention as much to my surroundings for, obvious reasons. Can't see much of them. And without a lens. And also like I'm a pretty clumsy person. And just for like security, I guess, for me right now, personally, I'm leaning more towards the mirrored just because of that. But I'm sure like over time, once I become more confident in it, maybe with a learning curve, I could transition with no problem.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
everything-
it's just something to consider. It's just something to consider because there are pros and cons to everything, every lens, every camera. And I would just see that as a bit of a con, like just a little bit, something to consider. That extra care.
Yeah.
I
mean,
mean, we're talking like mirrorless versus DSLR, then that is like a con for the mirrorless. It doesn't mean that it's like completely bad, but it is a con compared to
Calm down,
DSLR.
Brian.
That's
I'm
it.
kidding.
I'm just, I mean, it's the same thing. Like you could still end up with the same curve. The only thing that the thing is with the mirrorless is just you just have a piece of glass and it's not really doing much because the sensor, if you look at it, the glass is angled, the mirror is angled, but the glass really, because the sensor's up there, up top. So the glass is literally not really protecting anything. It's just, the thing is the sensor is in a different spot. Like you can literally
In
tilt
a
the
more
mirror.
vulnerable spot.
Hmm?
He said in a more vulnerable spot.
There you go.
Yeah, that brings back to acting. Like that's just fucking. That's a lot of work. Like, you're thinking,
Nah.
like, oh yeah, just like this. No, it's like anything.
I'm
like,
sure it's
you were
not
like,
as
oh, you take
bad.
good photos. That's super simple, but you get down to the nitty gritty. That's a lot of work. Like each thing, like that you do, it's cool. And then when it comes together, you make it. The idea is to make it look so easy.
Like Brian said, though, I don't think it's as bad as I'm imagining it, but it is something to consider.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. The last thing about mirrorless cameras compared to DSLRs, they usually have larger sensors, and that will make them better with low light situations. The larger a sensor is on a camera, the better it is in low light. So if you're working, if you're going to film in a low light situation or something like that, or if you just want a camera that is able to film better with less noise, then you want to get, then you most likely want to get a mirrorless camera with a larger sensor size.
Raphael said, I now realize why James is always covering the sensor. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
when you're on a film set, they're going the proper way to do it is covering it with your hand. And while the people, you have like that train of 1 to 2 or 3 people, if you have your assistant cameras helping you out, take off the lens, pass it, cover it with your hand, make sure nothing's getting in it, any hair, dust, whatever. And then you pass that other lens back, you attach it on there, and then you're good to go. And you always leave the
I feel
lens
like
cap
that's just
on.
basic care. I feel like that's just basic care and maintenance. Because either way, dust gets in, stuff gets in. It's
Yeah.
No,
good
it's a
to-
very like, it's a process when you're on a film set. That's why they do it, to make sure that.
No,
it
yeah, I
doesn't
know, but
get-
I'm just saying that, like, I feel like having that care should go for
Because
not just mirrorless.
cleaning your sensor off, even though you
Yes.
can, is still, you don't want to have to do that because it is more likely to accidentally get scratched or something like that. And if your sensor
Yeah.
gets scratched, there's nothing you can do. It's going to be scratched forever. If
No,
a lens
exactly,
gets
and that's what I'm
scratched, you can get
saying.
a different lens. And if something else gets scratched, you can get something else different. But if your sensor on your camera gets scratched, you're going to have to get a new camera. What, Priscilla?
Sorry. No, I was just saying I'm not saying that that's not like maintenance and stuff. I'm just saying that I feel like having that care with your lenses and with your camera itself is important, especially in that circumstance. But no matter what, like, just because you have a DSLR and the sensor is not as sensitive doesn't mean you shouldn't take care of it, and you shouldn't make sure to not get dust on it and be like, oh, I can just clean it later, or
You know,
I
I
can just
feel like
clean it a bunch,
it's
like,
good, like, to take as best care of things as you can and like get into the habit, because once it's a habit, it's just super easy and phenomenally. And then, like, again, like,
you don't
just
think
get
about
it-
it. You just
You
do
don't
it,
think
yeah.
about it. 1, 2, it's just part of like, it's part of the job, like part of like you shooting. That's just what you do, and like, super easy every time. And then 3, then it like every time you bring that camera out, it's always in pristine, and like you keep that level because of like pristine condition, and your equipment's gonna last longer and just treat you so much better if you treat your equipment well. I think
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah, any equipment you get, you always want to just take extra care with it because things can happen.
Yeah.
You can trip. You can,
And don't beat
forget
yourself
to
up
put the
either
lens
if
cap
stuff
on,
happens.
things like that, and you just don't want. You want to try to pay extra attention to every one of those types of things.
Definitely, and things do happen sometimes. So like, if it does, don't like, shit happens. But we should try to avoid as much as possible. Creating like dust particles and things is probably the best way to go. I agree with that.
Yeah.
100%.
But that's all I meant. I just wanted to make that clear. So it's not saying like I understand what you meant.
So compared to like the other cameras on the lower end, if you're doing like a budget, if you're doing a very budget production, compact cameras are one of the cheapest options you can go with, but they don't have as much versatility as mirrorless and DSLR cameras. DSLR and mirrorless cameras have the interchangeable lenses. They have more custom settings, high resolution quality, and larger sensor sizes so that they're better in low light, but they can also capture more of a wide angle view just with any kind of lens you use. So we'll talk about compact in a bit, but those, I would say DSLR or mirrorless should be a budget option if you're trying to make your set look a little more professional on a very cheap budget. Compact, I wouldn't go with because they're very automatic and they have a lot of auto settings that don't give you as much customization and doesn't make good for like a film or like a narrative piece aspect, because you want to be able to control the focus and you want to be able to control the angle and the lens, like how the focal length and things like that. You want to be able to control that in a narrative sense. So going with a compact camera, which we'll talk about later, it would just take away a lot of those things and really hinder the creativity, but it would be a lot easier to use and a cheaper version than anything else, I guess, if you were just going for cheap and easy. If you just want to like beginning to learn about cameras and beginning to learn about shooting, then maybe something like that would be what you want to go with. But moving on from DSLR and mirrorless cameras, you have cinema cameras. And on this picture, you got the Canon EOS C. And the cinema cameras are a lot bigger, they're a lot bulkier, they're also the most expensive, but they are dedicated for filmmaking. They're cinema cameras. They can't even really take photos. I know some can take stills at certain points, but they're not even meant for photos. They are meant specifically for filmmaking, digital filmmaking. And so they have the most options for filmmakers. They have the most things that you would want as a filmmaker because they are focused on you as their client to buy this product and use it, to use this device. So they're thinking about you and what you would want as a filmmaker to use their camera. And so they have the most options available for that. Most of the other camera types, they're focused like Brian said, DSLR and mirrorless. Mirrorless a little less so, but DSLR especially, they are a photography camera with video capabilities. So it's different. They're not specifically focused on video. They're focused on photography with, we also do video, which is also always going to be a little, it's not going to have as good of a product as is something that's specifically made for it.
That's true. I mean, the more specific and like pointed everything is, and the simpler it is. Like when I say simple, it's like it feels like it's simple, but it's not. But it feels like it is because it just clicks together super smoothly. I think that's the best.
Yeah, the more specified it is, the better it is in that specialized whatever it's aiming for.
Exactly.
Most of the other cameras, they can do like 4K raw photos, but a lot of them can't do raw video, which is where cinema cameras can. They can do raw video. Not all of them. Yeah, it depends on which one you're getting, but a lot of them have their own versions of raw or log, which allows you to have that extra detail. It looks a little ugly until you get it into post-production and do your color grade. And when you do that color grade, you have a lot more information for the colors so that you can kind of work it however you want. You can change a lot more with focus and color, and it gives you a lot more adaptability for exposure and flexibility in post-production, which is something you definitely want. You want to be able to change it to what you like and to have more information so that it looks better, instead of having less information and being stuck with a certain way of how it should look, like you might be with a DSLR or mirrorless camera when you're not shooting in RAW or you're not shooting in those log formats.
Makes sense. Yeah. The more it's like sometimes it's good to have like just a couple options, but then as you like do more stuff, it's like you want specific looks for different types of shots and different kind of like even genres, right? So that makes sense, and it's really awesome to be able to choose that for the specific looks, because then it just makes it all come together so much better in the final product, I guess.
Yeah,
from what I know of it.
Cinema cameras also have a higher dynamic range, which is whenever if you're looking out a window but you're indoors, higher dynamic ranges will have it be the bright areas will have more details and the dark areas will have more details, and you can see all of it at once. Of course, they're still not at the point where you can point it directly out of a bright sunny day window when you're in a very dark room and it can see everything. Still not there yet, but we're getting closer. On a DSLR or mirrorless camera, they have less of a dynamic range, which means that when you're indoors and you see a window in the background, it's going to be super overexposed. And because it's overexposed, because you're exposing for the indoors, which is a darker room, the window looks overexposed. And because of that, in editing, it usually has less information, and you can't just bring the brightness down in the window and make it look good because it doesn't actually have the details of what's out there. Just like darks with dynamic range as well. If you have if your dynamic range is smaller, then the darker it is, the less information it's going to have as well. Now, if you have a larger, higher dynamic range, you'll have more information in the darks, more information in the brights, and you'll be able to shoot something and it'll look good with darks and brights in the same image, in the same frame. So cinema cameras really excel at that compared to most of the other cameras. but it all like with anything else, it's going to depend on which one you get. Maybe there's a DSLR camera that's a higher end DSLR or a higher end mirrorless camera that can do it better than a lower end cinema camera. But you want to kind of see the trade-off between the two and kind of know the differences. For the most part, cinema cameras have higher dynamic ranges. They also mostly have a better ISO sensitivity, which makes less noise, and it allows you to shoot in those low light situations without it creating that unwanted noise and those little specks that appear all over the screen.
Yeah. Which isn't good. You don't want that.
They also use a different shutter technology that reduces unwanted distortion. When you're shooting video with like a DSLR or mirrorless camera, they use what's called rolling shutter, or I believe maybe this is just for DSLR, but they use rolling shutter. And because of the way it works with that thing opening and closing the mirror, it sometimes causes distortion on a few different parts of the image. And it's called the jello effect. It makes stuff appear like it's wiggling or like it's bending and weaving. Like if you look at the background of the building in this photo from left to right, it looks like it's bending to the left in two of the photos, and then it's straight up in the photo all the way to the right. And so because it was shot with like that DSLR or whatever, that it had that unwanted effect, and it's making it look a little weird. Same thing in this photo. Where is it at? Right here, you can see the same things happening to that. I think that's a telephone pole. And in the middle, it's making it look like a wiggly straw or something like that. Like it doesn't look like it's a straight thing. And that's because you're moving past it and it looks weird, and it's something that you don't want to happen. So cinema cameras use global shutter instead of rolling shutter, and that allows them to not have those effects happen, this unwanted distortion. Another thing about cinema cameras is there's less chance for this. I think it's more, how do you say it? Mori? I don't know how to say it, but you know, this effect where it looks like the things that the designs on a t-shirt or a wall or something that has very close lines, they start to look very, they start to bend and look really weird. And that happens a lot on DSLRs and mirrorless cameras, but it happens less often on cinema cameras because of the way their pixels or their photo sites work, and because of the way they're designed and the way they take in that information, that light information. It allows them to shoot this kind of design without having that effect, or at least not as often as you would find on a DSLR camera, where it's having these weird bands on the shirt when really that shouldn't be there. They're also a lot bigger because most of them have internal cooling systems that can prevent them from overheating. One of the problems with DSLRs and mirrorless cameras is that they do not have these systems in them, and they're not made, like Brian said, they are mainly made for photography. And because of that, one, they have that limit of, like Priscilla was talking about, that 30-minute or 10-minute or 15-minute, whatever kind of brand or camera you're getting. DSLRs and the mirrorless cameras don't have as long that they can record for the most part. I know some mirrorless ones are coming out where they're allowed to record unending and they don't have any of the time limit, but a lot of them still do. And that's mostly due to the fact that they will start overheating if you're trying to use them with video for too long. They use a lot of energy. That's why the batteries drain. That's why the batteries die. It's because they're using so much energy. So if you're using them for long periods, like you would on a narrative production set, then they'll start overheating and they might not be usable for some time, and you might have to give them time to cool down. Whereas a cinema camera will have its internal cooling system that'll automatically turn on in between takes and whenever it needs to use it. They can still overheat, but it's very less likely for them to overheat because they are made for these long periods of time of use. So that's another reason you want them. Another thing about them is they are bigger and bulkier for another reason besides just that. One is to protect, it's like have a casing that protects the inside It's a little more sturdy and durable. Another reason is you're going to have these big lenses and these attachments on it, and you want to make sure that it's all equally distributed, so that if you're using a DSLR and you're trying to use these big lenses and you're trying to use these other attachments, it's going to start feeling very heavy in certain areas, and it might start tilting or falling forward on its face toward the lens. Whereas a cinema camera like the one right here, this Sony one, it has a big enough body to where it can hold it without leaning forward and falling over, compared to a DSLR camera that's a lot skinnier and a lot smaller, where it might start falling forward with a longer and longer lens you use, which means you'll have to use like a body or something to hold up a bracket to hold up the lens, which you'll still have to use on a cinema camera for the most part, but it does offer a more sturdy overall device. And then lastly, the reason why they're so big is they are actually meant to be used on film sets and things like that, production sets, where you have not just the camera operator, but the first assistant camera working with the camera operator. So they have buttons on one side of it mostly, and that's where all like the buttons that a first assistant camera would need to use, like things like the focus and things like that, can be pulled from the lens while also messing with the buttons on the side. And then they have the hands where you hold it on the other side for the camera operator. So if you're using a tripod and you can hold it from one side of the camera while the first AC is working on the other side of it, it makes it a lot easier to work with than if you're trying to have 2 or 3 people all working on a DSLR camera, because there's less room for them. Yeah, exactly.
Like at the end of the day, like on a camera, it's a 2-person like camera, then you need 2, but otherwise, like most of the time it's just 1 person on the camera and everyone else either like assisting, like holding the side gear.
Right. And that is also a con in a way, if you don't have 2 or 3 people, if you're trying to shoot something yourself, trying to access everything at once will be a little bit harder on a cinema camera, because it is more spread out, because it is made for having more people. Now I know something like the Canon, it's specifically made to try to be a one person camera. If you're using it for, they say using it for like a documentary workhorse, a lot of documentary filmmakers use it, because that's usually when you're going to be doing it yourself, compared to having like a short film or a film where you're going to have 2 or 3 people on the camera at once. So
yeah,
Canon cameras, they're cinema cameras that they're trying to use it for, like making it available for one person to use with ease. But other cameras like Sony, Red and Blackmagic, some of their cameras, they're made specifically with 2 or 3 people in mind.
No, not the Red. The Red is just a tiny little box. Everything else is all third party, and you have to buy the accessories to go with it. I think when you purchase the Red, it's just the camera. I think it might include the monitor, but the monitor is expensive. The monitor itself could cost almost as much as a really cheap DSLR. The monitor is expensive in itself, but the main reason, the biggest reason why these cameras are built this way is because they have a lot of additional features with it, like this camera you're on right now, the Blackmagic. This one has internal ND filters, which is going to take up some space. And then if you go back to the Canon picture, it has XLR ports for audio. So they've considered other departments and other aspects of the filmmaking for this camera too. That is why the camera is designed this way. It's not necessarily because it's going to be used as a counterweight to a lens or not. I mean, some of these cameras are pretty heavy, and a lot of what you just said was pretty true too. But some of these cinema lenses are heavy. Like there's no camera. Like I have my mirrorless camera that I have over there. I have a 28 millimeter lens that's actually bigger and heavier than the actual camera itself. And I hold the lens, and I don't even hold the camera, I hold the lens. That's how small, because the camera is so small. So to make a camera that's going to counterweight a lens is kind of ridiculous, because then you would have like a 30-pound camera, which is I mean, the camera itself, like with all the accessories, is already heavy as it is. But to try to make a camera big on purpose is kind of like, and nowadays, like we're going, like this camera you're on right now, this camera is actually pretty small compared to the cameras were built back in the day. Like it's actually pretty small, and that's the direction they're trying to go in. Like if you look at the Blackmagic or the Blackmagic Pocket, or even the Red camera, like they're trying to make them smaller and smaller and smaller, so that you could add more accessories, and that so you could, and that's another reason for the design of the camera as well. Like the Red, I think the Red has built-in rig mount, so you can rig it up without having to get a when I say rig it up, like full rig rails and matte boxes and all that stuff to put on it. So like for my camera, I have a Blackmagic, I had to buy a cage and I had to buy a rig system just to hook it up. But with the
Yeah.
that part is already, it's built that way. So all you have to do is just get the rails and hook up a matte box and you should be good to go. But yeah, nowadays, like they're trying to make cameras smaller and smaller so that you can fit them in more compact places. Because that was the whole big thing with DSLRs, is that you could pretty much put them anywhere and get, good stuff. So nowadays they're making cameras smaller nowadays. We're trying to, but while still trying to complement all the other departments like sound and built-in ND filters and whatnot.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I was just meaning like if the body itself is going to be more stable than a DSLR or mirrorless camera would, because the mirrorless or DSLR will be way more skinny. So you would definitely need to buy like a cage or like a bracket to hold up the lens, especially if you're trying to use cinema lenses. Compared to like these other ones where sometimes you can get away with not using a bracket. You might still need to hold the lens from the bottom, but it won't be necessarily like making your camera lean forward.
Yeah, surprisingly, like these cameras aren't that heavy. Like that camera you're on now, it's really not that heavy. But it's
Oh yeah,
when
no, it's only like 10 pounds. I have one, not this one, but I have a Mark III.
Yeah, like when you start putting lenses and cages on it, that's when it gets like kind of heavy, really heavy.
Yeah.
I think the heaviest camera I've experienced that's just the camera that's heavy is, I think, the Sony A7, whatever. I don't know, but it's like one of the cinema Sonys that thing is like 25 pounds by itself. And then when you add all the accessories on there, it's like a good 40 something pounds. It's like, dang, thing is heavy for no reason.
But yeah, I was actually going to say these are more expensive, and they do have all those more accessories that you needed for optimal use, which is why you don't want to just buy just the body and think that you have the whole thing. It's going to take a few more accessories than that to make it like a full-on camera that you need. Otherwise, you're just going to get a body like this that doesn't really have the
Not to cut you off.
the viewfinder. No, you're good.
That's another thing about the cameras. Like when you buy DSLR or mirrorless, they usually come with the LCD screen in the back. So like if you get a camera, like if you get a kit, I remember DSLRs used to come with a kit where it was like the body and the camera, and you were pretty much good to shoot. But now, like if you buy, like the Blackmagic doesn't come with the lens, but it has an LCD in the back. But the Red camera, you have to purchase the monitor separately. So like you buy it, and now you have to buy you have to buy them both. So that's another thing you got to consider when thinking about what cameras to go with. Is not all of them, are going to help you out like that. And some of them just, well, here's the camera. Now you got to go buy the rest of the accessories to go with it to make it work. As far as with like DSLR, where it's like pretty much you're almost good to go, right out of the box.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can buy like cinema camera kits, but they are very much more expensive. So that is something to consider though, for anyone who's trying to like look into which one to buy. Like just keep in mind that if you are buying a camera body for a cinema camera, you are going to need quite a few more attachments to make it all work. And just depending on the company, like you was talking about Red, certain companies, even if it's made by a third party, sometimes they seem like they're extremely overpriced for what they are. When some other camera companies have the same kind of thing, but it's, a third of the price or something like that. So you want to also check out how much those accessories are. It's kind of like buying a car. And if you buy an expensive car, if you have the money for it, but then you're not thinking about all of the parts that are going to need to be changed, and only certain
How much maintenance
car
costs?
mechanics can work with those certain cars, because they don't, they're not as mainstream, so less people know about them. It's kind of like that, in the way that you want to be sure that you know all of the accessories that have to go into it, how much those are going to be, so you can kind of see the overall price that you're looking at. Because another thing to think about is these cameras take up, because they can shoot RAW, because they can shoot, this one shoots 12K, so higher resolution, things like that. Because they're doing that, they're going to take up more memory, they're going to take up more storage, and the memory cards that you got to get aren't just going to be like an SD card or something like that, like how they used to be. My camera, I know my camera uses compact flash cards, which are more expensive, and I know that certain other brands will use their own kind. And so you just need to be aware of what kind of like memory you'd need. You want to have backup memory cards, you want to have backup batteries. So you want to check out how much all that stuff is, to be sure that you can afford the overall package, instead of just thinking you're going to get the body and you're good to go, because you're not. And last thing is, depending on what kind of camera you get, the sensor size is going to be different. This is going to be some stuff we talk about, I think, next week, when we talk about what to look for when you're going to buy a camera. But like the lenses, the kind of the bracket that holds the lenses, what kind of lenses you're able to use on it, and then what the sensor size is. Those are all things to consider when you're talking about cinema cameras, or any camera really, because then you got to see what kind of lenses you'll be able to use with it. And if you already have lenses and you want to keep them, then you're going to have to buy a camera that can fit them, or that can adapt, that can have an adapter to be able to fit them. Because not every camera allows adapters for different lenses to be used. Some only allow their certain kind of lens to be used on their camera. They don't have any kind of adapter that fits to it.
Yeah.
So that is also some stuff to keep in mind, but we'll talk more about that kind of thing.
It makes sense. And it's
next
like,
week.
you want to have like the camera that's going to work for you. And like, you don't want to just have gear that isn't like, it's just sitting on the shelf, right? So you want to make sure you're using everything.
Yeah. Make sure
Unless
that
like
you're
you have
able
like
to
a
use it.
huge warehouse, and then you get tons of stuff on the shelf, depending on how big you are.
All right, so now if you're just starting out and you don't want to get anything that has to be very manual, you kind of just want to pick up something and be able to shoot a quick video, or you just want to start practicing in film and cinematography and things like that. Compact cameras could be for you. They're very cheap compared to the others. They're very compact and small, so you can kind of just put them in your pocket or put them in a little bag and take them around anywhere. They don't have interchangeable lenses. Their sensors are very small, so they're usually like very wide. It's much more of a point and shoot. So they have a lot of automatic options, like automatic focus and white balance and things like that, to just very quickly allow you to be able to use it. So in a photo setting, those work all right. You still, usually when you're doing photography, you want to be able to control the different aspects of like the aperture and the shutter speed and ISO. And in video, you definitely want to usually be able to do that, because if somebody walks into or out of frame, or if you switch where the camera's looking, the autofocus is going to have to readjust, and it's going to be noticeable in the actual video. So those are some things to keep in mind if you want to actually get into film. If this is something you just want to like start out with to get a sense of cameras and stuff, then this could be it. But if you're trying to actually get serious and make like a real short film or narrative work where you're trying to show emotion and things like that, this generally isn't going to work for you, because it's not going to do what you're wanting it to. It's not going to It's going to focus on something when you don't want it to. It's going to have the brightness go up when you want it to look darker and a little moodier. It's just going to be kind of like a phone set to auto, and you don't have any manual options. So you want to keep all that in mind if you're trying to get this. And then most of them have a very wide angle view, so it keeps more things in focus as well. So it doesn't have much of that bokeh effect, but that's to make sure everything stays in focus. They have like, the little thing where they see where the person's eye is and the head, and sometimes have dual focus and things like that. And they are getting better than they used to be, but they still have those cons to them, especially the not being able to change the lens and just like a bunch of auto functions.
Makes sense. My thinking is like, if you're going to have like tons of like clients, just buy the one that you're going to be using all the time. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, if you're able to, like, because like not everyone's able to afford that right off the bat, and I understand that.
well, it's better, in my opinion, it's better to take 2 months extra and wait and just then buy the exact thing you need. It's like me, if like for whatever gear, like if I buy half a first aid kit, it's not going to get me any jobs. You have to have the whole, you know what I mean? It's just like,
Yeah.
it's better to play it smart. Maybe instead of like going out for 2 months, you just wait and you get the one, like just get the right quality and buy it once. I mean, you can also do the buy and sell thing where you buy something and then you resell it after you've like used it when you need to step it up. That's another way to go as well if you're thinking like on a budget, so you can like buy and resell stuff
Yeah.
after you've used it. Well, because it's technology, you just wipe it, make sure that there's nothing like from your shoots or whatever. It's when you, yeah, and that's another way to go.
Yeah.
If you can't afford the one that you want right off the top. So makes sense to me. It all ends
Yeah,
up-
I was just sorry. I was just
No,
gonna
that's
put
okay.
that like that said though, you don't have to rush to get the latest and greatest every single time. Like a lot of people run into that where like, oh well, I can't start working on stuff until I have this camera, until I get that.
Well,
Like,
no, it's
you
not
could still
true.
invest and get, but you don't need to buy like the latest newest camera every single time. You can start with a one that's not the newest thing, and then upgrade slowly and work on your craft and better your craft and get better at that. Because there have been a lot of movies and at the end of the day it really shows that it matters more who's behind the camera than the camera itself. Like Frick, there have been movies that won awards that were shot on iPhones, that were shot on DSLRs, so at the end of the day, yes, invest, because there will be a difference in quality and in what you can accomplish and what you can capture, but don't let that limit you, and don't use that as a crutch to not continue to work on your craft or to not start something.
Use what you have. Yeah, use what you have, and then when you notice problems, like upgrade them or like fix it, and then go from there, and then readjust, and then go again, and like trial by error. Like, it's just like if you do something, you set something up, and it doesn't go exactly the way you want, you still win because, well, now you can adjust, and you've just learned all of that, and you can adjust and add that in, and then be like, oh, if only I had this. Then the next time you can bring that and just make it all flow nicely together and just make it as perfect as you can. And I think it's a good goal to have, to make something be like perfect the way that you think, and then also just be like nice to be like, yeah, wasn't quite, but we got close, and that's a win.
Right.
Yeah,
I was
I just
mainly just saying
wanted
like this kind of camera would be like for the very beginners, absolute beginners that are too afraid to get something that has lenses and things like that. If you are just starting with, photography or filmmaking, and you want to just kind of learn the very basics, something like this would help because you don't have external lenses, you don't have all these other accessories. Everything's kind of in one, but it just does not have that same quality, and it does not have as many options, which could also be good for a brand new beginner if they just kind of want to learn how to frame and things, but they don't want to have to do those. They don't want to have to worry about aperture or shutter speed or any of that. It can be good, and it can help people to start learning, and then
I don't know, I feel like
once they feel comfortable, they can step up to the next thing. But mainly these cameras are just, like I said, they're called point and shoot for a reason. It's just so you can take it out, shoot, start taking a photo or a video, and using it, but they're not used in like, they're not at all used in a professional setting. They're not even used in like behind the scenes. This is basically just like a consumer camera that's sold anywhere and everywhere that you can just pick up at a local supermarket, Walmart, Target. You can just grab one of these and start going and taking photos.
Yeah.
Honestly,
needing
I was
money.
gonna say I feel like these are kind of obsolete now with phones and how much better phone cameras are getting and that kind of stuff. Because I was meaning cameras in general, not this one specifically when I met my statement. But yeah, it's kind of funny because I'm like, who still has this except for like people
They're
who
still coming out with new ones.
phones. I know, right? It's so weird because it's like, I guess I can understand it from the perspective of like, if you're on a family vacation and you don't want to be on your phone, but you want to take pictures, but you want it to be quick, you can use these because I know that there are people that like to disconnect and not be around their phones and stuff
Well,
like
it's
that.
also so that your phone doesn't die, and there's other reasons.
That
like
too,
that,
yeah.
so. But it's also because not everyone can afford a freaking $1,300 iPhone 13s plus whatever the crap's out now.
Well, my thinking is then you have to like shoot something with somebody that
That's like
ask
buying a
now
good
with
camera
somebody.
at that point.
Well, yeah, but pixels are like $300 and they're pretty darn good. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
Glitchy, but
my thinking is like just do it. Like if you know that you're gonna be a camera person, just buy it and buy what's gonna be like get you in the door and do it and then work at it and then get in
yeah,
the
I know
door.
people who started with DSLRs, and now they're like, they make a lot of money with their cinema cameras and all this kind of stuff, but they started out with DSLR shooting weddings and stuff like that. And Raphael, to answer your question, yeah, I think there was a guy who won, I think it was an iPhone 7. He won a movie, a film festival, a huge film festival, and he shot it on an iPhone 7, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, it's possible.
All right, so
Not
another camera
recommending
that
it, but
another camera that's this is just for photographers. I've never really heard of anybody in film using these, but they're called bridge cameras. They have a larger zoom range, a massive zoom range, but they don't have interchangeable lenses. It's just this one thing that's attached to it. And apparently they take pretty good photos, but not as good or high quality as DSLR or a mirrorless camera. So they're basically like a compact camera that's like a step up from a compact camera, in my opinion. And so, I mean, they're not really used by film. I was just going to point those out in case one of you is trying to buy a camera, you come across it and you're starting to figure like, what is this? Is this something new? It's mainly used for like wildlife photography, sports photography, and things like that. And then the last thing we have is these action cameras, like a GoPro, which are pretty much, they're very small. They're mountable pretty much anywhere. A lot of them are waterproof, but they also have a very, very small sensor size, and they don't have as many custom options, and it's a very wide angle. But these are good if you need to just like put something on a bike and capture a little bit of footage here or there, some B-roll or something like that. They're good they can mount anywhere. People put them on their helmets. If you're doing something very, very fast, they also have a high frame rate that they can use, frames per second, so that you can capture things in slow motion and play it back. But they are not typically used as often as, the other options out there. These are mainly for vloggers and people who go like, outdoor people who go hiking and river rafting and things like that and want to film it and put together like one of those videos for travel agencies and things like that.
Makes sense. It's less huge cinema. Yeah, that makes sense because on those they have the big gear. It's just what it is.
Yeah. All right, so those are the types of cameras. Anybody have any questions and comments? So Raphael, to answer your earlier question, cinema cameras would be what you want to go with if you can afford it. If not, then you want to go with a mirrorless camera if you're using filmmaking, but you want to just be sure you're checking out what kind of lenses can attach to it, because as of right now, there's less lens options available for a mirrorless camera compared to DSLR counterparts.
And compatibility is very important, because if you get a mirrorless that's not compatible with a lot of lenses or only the most expensive brands or whatever, that's going to be really annoying too.
Yeah, like the mount. Also, yeah, like the certain camera brands, they have their own codecs and things like that. So that is something else. We'll talk about that more next week. with brands and things like that when we talk about what to look for when buying a camera. But certain ones will have their own codecs that are only used in certain applications or are better used for one over the other and things like that.
Dude, Brian, where are you? I can only hear wind.
Well, to add to that, it really, you got to ask yourself like what it is that you're trying to get at. I have cinema cameras, I have mirrorless cameras, and I started off shooting DSLR, but I like mirrorless cameras because you could go from shooting a high quality video to taking photography. So like I had a shoot where I was like, all right, let's do this. We shot the video, and then instantly we were like, all right, let's go take some photos for covers, for the posters and stuff like that.
Right.
So you have like the best of both worlds. Like you can kind of get a lot of good quality video, but then easily switch over and do photography as well. But if you're strictly like, I want to do film, I want to do cinema, then the cinema cameras are the way to go. But the thing is, like, a lot of people worry about price, which they can get pretty pricey. But nowadays, like you had mentioned something about the DSLRs being the cheaper alternative, which is true, mainly true. But I know I think the Canon 5D Mark III is still selling for like $3,000, where my Black Magic costs less than that. And I was like, why are they still selling this DSLR for $3,000? When I have a cinema camera that shoots 4K for under that. You know what I mean? So like cameras can get kind of tricky. Some of them can be expensive for no reason. Like I'm not a Canon fan at all, specifically because they're super expensive for no reason. But a lot of them can get pretty pricey. Some of them can be pretty affordable. There's a guy I followed. His name is Kennedy, but he's the guy from France. I keep mentioning him. He got famous for shooting videos on a Rebel Canon T3i, and they're like really, really good videos because he went and got the camera. The camera's super cheap. Like you could get it for like $400, $500, but he used Sigma lenses. He saved them. He said the money he spent. He saved money buying a really cheap camera, and the money he would have spent on an expensive camera, he spent on a really expensive lens. And he made really, really awesome videos, and he got famous for it. And
one of the reasons a lot of people like Canon is just also because they're compatible with a lot of lenses and stuff like that.
No, oh yeah, Canon. They have two different. Well, maybe they have two different. Well, they have. My biggest thing about Canon is like you buy one camera, and then you buy another one, and then like they change them out so quick. Like Nikon. The reason why I bought Nikon and I never looked back because I went to the store. I'll never forget. I went to go buy because my first time shooting on the Canon 7D, I was like, I have to have this camera. So I saved up a bunch of money and I went to go buy the Canon 7D. And when I went to go, there was the Nikon. They had just put it out there. It was sitting right next to it. So I was like, what is this one? And I went home, did research, and I was like, they're the same camera. It's just one is Nikon, one is Canon. But I was like, this one is like several $100s cheaper. I can save my money, buy an extra memory card, a bag, and maybe a lens with the extra money I didn't spend buying the 7D. And I did that. And I never looked back. I was like, all right, I like the images I'm getting with the Nikon. And I learned later on as I bought more Nikon cameras that I never had to worry about lenses because the mount stayed the same. They always have the F and G mount. So like as long as I had a Nikon camera, I never had to worry about changing lenses or any of that stuff. It was always the same. Canon, on the other hand, like every time they come out with like a third camera, like something is changed, like they either go from the EF to another different kind of mount where it's like you have to get another lens, and it's annoying, it's frustrating. So for me, I prefer Nikon for that reason. Like Nikon is my base. I have all Nikon lenses, so whatever camera I get, I have to get an adapter for it. So like my Black Magic, I have a the speed booster I have on there, but it's set for Nikon. So the same lenses I shoot with the Blackmagic are the same lenses I pop them off my camera and I pop them straight on my DSLR and take pictures with it. The same stuff.
If there's anything that I've learned and I would recommend anyone is to do your own research and see what works for you and your preferences and your budget. Because if there's any, like I've seen some people swear by the Panasonic and it's like their favorite thing ever. Some people swear by the Nikons. Some people swear by the Canons. I feel like there's a lot of like personal preference and like some people like their operating systems better, like the way that they're just like their stuff works. And so it seems like it's a very personal thing. So at the end of the day, get recommendations from people, but do your research and see what works best for you. And pros and cons, always evaluate the pros and cons. If you see someone's video, like we were watching a few videos of like talking about different cameras and pros and cons and that kind of thing. And you can clearly see someone's biases. Everyone's going to have their biases and their preferences, obviously. But if you see a video or a person in particular only say good things about something, there's a con there. Like there's always a con. So just be a little careful with that and do your own and figure out what works for you. Because yeah, it's crazy how many people I've seen that like James is obsessed with this Blackmagic. You cannot tell him different. I know someone who we were watching a video of someone who was like swore by Panasonic and it was their favorite thing ever. Then there was another video where the person was naming their top 10 and a bunch of them were like brands we've never heard before and we're like, what? Or brands that we were like, really? And it was like their favorite cameras. And so yeah, it's really weird.
I will say definitely she is right. Definitely do your research. However, you got to keep in mind that, because I brought this up before as well, the industry is very, very name brand specific. So like shoot Nikon. So that makes me the underdog by default because Nikon is a known brand, very popular with photographers, not so popular for video. So like I don't get as many gigs when I tell people, they'll look at my demo reel and they're like, oh, we love your reel, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, can you send us a list of your gear? And they see Nikon and they're like, oh, it changes everything. Like it's very, very brand specific. Like I have a Fuji film, which Fuji is very known for making some of the best lenses in the world, but they waited till like last minute to come out with some DSLRs, which are not DSLR, but mirrorless DSLRs, which are amazing, like awesome cameras. But I'm like, you guys are like 5 years too late to come out with this camera because now everybody's going to the cinema cameras, but nobody's heard of like Fuji. Nobody. People like I shoot like this, that, and the only reason I bought the Fuji camera was because it shot 4K. It was cheap and it shot 4K. So I was like, I can buy this camera and now I can tell people I shoot 4K. And then I started shooting with it and I was like, well, this camera is actually pretty serious.
No, yeah, I've heard good things about Fuji.
The only thing about it is like I said before, it's a photography camera. So this camera in particular, the Fuji TX20, is because the camera is so, and this is a lot of issues with a lot of other mirrorless cameras, is because they're so small, you can't rig it up. So you can't bulk it up and put all these matte boxes and stuff, which for me, I like that aspect of it because it goes back to the basics of just you and a camera and not having to worry about all this other extra stuff. But something to think about, like if you're buying this camera, you might not be able to put all the stuff, all the gear, get all the third-party products on there like you want. Like if you want your camera to look like it's a cinema camera, like I think some people just rig up their camera just to show off. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we saw a video of this guy that literally said, we saw this video of this guy that literally said that he had to put like an accessory or a mount or whatever.
No, he put a matte box. He put a
matte
box
box in front of his DSLR because people would make faces when he would come with his smaller cameras to shoot stuff, and they'd be like, is that what you're shooting with, and all that kind of stuff. And so he'd have to like put attachments and stuff to it to make it look bigger and bulkier. And he actually said that he came the next day with just a matte box on one of his cameras, and they were like, oh, okay, so you switched cameras, good. Like, that, oh my God, because people just associate bigger camera with quality. So
What do you
yeah.
what do you think of the Blackmagic? They dropped the price on the Mini. What's your thoughts on those? That?
I think like they came in and they just devastated the whole industry because all these cameras were coming out and they were super expensive. And then here comes Blackmagic, where it's here like, yo, let's give you that for really, really cheap.
People's biggest complaint with Blackmagic though is that it feels cheap. Like even though it's not, a lot of people say that it's plasticky sometimes, or like it's not the best feeling camera to use.
I mean, but if you're coming from DSLR, you don't know. I think
Right.
it's a great startup camera. If we're talking
Yeah,
about-
definitely.
Any idea why they dropped the price? on
Blackmagic
this?
for sure.
Well,
That's
because
the ones I was looking at.
chances are they're probably about to introduce another product, and they always do that when they when they so like Priscilla was saying about not having to be up to date with the technology. She's absolutely right, because you'll never catch up if you're trying to stay up to date, because you're gonna have to save money to buy this new camera. Like when I bought this 4K, I kid you not, the second I bought this, I clicked the submit button and it got the email confirming it's in the mail. They came out with the 6K.
Yep.
Literally that. I was like,
That's how it is.
Yep.
you'll never catch up. You'll
And
never.
now it's 12K, right?
Yep. Now it's okay.
And it's about the same price.
Right.
They have to drop the price in order to make the 6K to justify the 6K being the price that it is. They had to drop the price. So normally when you drop prices, you know something is about to come out.
Right.
Yep, that is true every time.
Same thing with these GoPros. Every time they come out with a new one, the other one drops like $100, even though it's basically the same thing. They just say it's, oh, it's the Hero 10. The Hero 9 is kind of the same thing. It just has like one extra feature so they can bring out a new version. And it's usually like back to back if they show it. You ever see like a cross comparison of different cameras when they come out with like one right after the other? It usually looks almost exactly the same for the most part.
So, but
So
the
for-
thing, 6K has like I said, the industry is name brand specific. So the 6K, the mount is specifically EF mount for Canon lenses. So I wouldn't even have been able to. I mean, I could have bought it and got an adapter, but like I have this, my speed booster would not fit on there because I have the speed boosters I'm using from the original Pocket. So I wouldn't have to buy another adapter, and I just don't. I'm just being lazy. I just don't want to do it. And when I bought the original Pocket, I was like, I'm never gonna buy another camera again. This is it. And then they came out with the 4K, and I was like, nah, 4K isn't enough to sell me. But then I shot with it, and I was like, oh, it shoots up to 120 frames per second, huh? Okay, I'm gonna buy it. Like that's enough to get. When I buy stuff like stuff that I don't have. Like it has to have a feature. Like 4K wasn't a feature that I didn't have because I had the Fuji, but the being able to shoot RAW and the being able to shoot at 120 frames per second was like, well, now I have to buy the camera. But the
So
6K,
that would be a good note. It's like do your research, but do your research on what it can do, not the brand name itself. Focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, like you could. There's brand
If
names.
you're
that are
trying to
just
get
focused
clients,
on-
I agree with Brian in that you need to think of what is going to be. I mean, we're talking about like narrative works here. So if you're trying to get jobs in the industry where you're the camera operator, or you're trying to get somebody to rent out your equipment, most likely you're gonna need those name brands to get more jobs. But if you're just trying to shoot your own stuff, that's when you can just kind of decide it based on what it can do, what it actually looks like.
It depends.
When you're trying to edit, right? Can you your workflow is what editing software do you use? Is it DaVinci Resolve, or you're able to read other software also?
I just want to say it depends on like what you're selling to. I mean, at the end of the day, like what kind of client you're catering to, because like if you're catering to a very like brand name specific clientele, then yeah, it's probably gonna matter a lot. If you're kind of more catering towards maybe it's still also high end, but they're just not caring so much. Like it depends what your audience is who your target market is as well, from and having the equipment that works for you. This is my
Right.
opinion,
To
right?
answer your
So,
I'm learning DaVinci right now. I'm not 100% proficient at it like I am with the other software, but DaVinci comes with a camera, and you don't have to have a camera to get DaVinci. It's free, like it's freaking free, like it's freaking
Yeah.
legit.
Right.
It's legit. So, but I know Premiere, I know a little Final Cut, but for me, my personal projects, I edit on Vegas because software I used, the first software I learned, and being experienced in all the different softwares, I will say it's the most fastest and most efficient compared to Premiere and compared to Final Cut. But let me think, what was I gonna say? But yeah, like I said, the industry is very name brand specific. I'm gonna say that again because it's the same thing with editing too. Like when you get editing gigs, they're gonna ask you, are you proficient in Premiere? So I know Vegas, I know.
Depends, like if you're marketing towards like documentary style or certain product style clientele, then it might not be brand name specific.
A lot of
Actually, because in what I've heard,
section, it's not the whole thing.
I don't know. I feel like I've heard that in my in the experience of people that I know, hearing from them, the people that know the people that know the least about this kind of stuff, the people that know less, are actually the ones that focus on those name brands more. And when you say something that they don't know, they're like, oh, I don't know that one. I never heard of it. Like, that's what I've heard from a lot of people. It's like, unless you say a big name that they know, they kind of like, huh.
Yeah, I
They
think
kind of question if you're gonna do it. Yeah.
get what works for you in the highest quality that you enjoy shooting. Because if you enjoy shooting it, you're just gonna have so much more fun. The clients are gonna do well, and at the end of the day, clients want to see results. Right?
I mean, yeah, but before you get the chance to show them results, they're going to look at not only your reel, but they're also going to ask questions. And some clients are annoying and picky, so appearances matter. Unfortunately, that sucks, but it's true. You got to be able to market yourself. So yes, don't go crazy on it, but have like a little something, like that guy who put like the thing on his camera. He was like, you know what? I'll put in this extra work because if they feel more confident just seeing that it's bigger, and if this helps them recommend me, and this helps, me get more, fine, whatever, like. It sucks, but it's a reality. Appearances matter, and
yeah, but it's more important for it to be like not necessarily a brand name, also to have everything just be of high quality, and that might even include high-end brand names that most people don't even know about. It might even be better than the brand names that most people know about, and more expensive. You just don't know, right? So it's like whatever you want to do and works for you.
Yeah.
And like what you're selling and like in your whole like business like outline and things like that, and that's just.
Right. Like I said, I think it's more about if you're trying to get jobs in that field, or if you're just trying to work on your own stuff, that is what should determine you're even considering the brand. I would say that would be like where you consider it a bit and you weigh that to the other options a little bit more, just because of the brand name, compared to if you're just working on your own stuff, you're just doing it for yourself. Well, now brand name shouldn't matter at all. You should just get what works best for you.
And then once you have stuff to show those people, like your own stuff, you can focus on maybe getting something more brand name here or there. But now at least you have more to show them of your own work that you didn't have to break the bank for or go that extra mile unnecessarily, or earlier than you needed to for. Like, you didn't have to get that more expensive, like more brand name editing software right away. You waited for that because you didn't need it at that moment.
Yeah, like get it when it's like you'll just know, trust yourself, get it at the right time that you know that you need what you need. So it's just like if you're starting up, it's like you want exactly what you need for what you're doing, and then as you go and you're having success and you want to expand, then you kind of do that. That's what it works.
Yeah.
Lakota, what software? What are you using for your Blackmagic shoot that you did recently?
Oh, I am not editing it. It's gonna be Mel and Arden, and they're using Premiere.
Premiere, okay.
Yeah.
The workflow is pretty good.
They actually both already had it, which is good because since they're both editing it, it's easier for the workflow if they both have the same editing software.
Yeah, that really helps, definitely.
Eric takes Blackmagic Raw, so that's a good thing.
Huh?
Yeah.
Well, like Lakota was saying, some cameras have specific codecs, like they have their own codecs. Some softwares, some computers in general can't even open the footage, so you won't even be able to see it because they have their own specific codec.
B-raw, yeah.
Because it's such a new camera, they came up with their own log footage, and like only Premiere and DaVinci could open it at first, but now all the other softwares are catching up. So that was a big problem at first too. So that was another thing. Like if you have a camera that's like that new to a point where nobody can edit your footage, like you know what I mean? Because it's just like some cameras shoot. I know Canon has a log where it's like you have to convert it first. Like you can't just open it up in QuickTime or anything like that. You have to like convert it over in order for it to. It's like some kind of raw footage where you have to go. I think it's like Bridgestorm or something you have to go through to open it first. So that's another thing to consider is like how much of a headache is it going to be to actually get results from the product. Like sometimes some cameras can put out an image straight out of the camera and it's good, and then some you have to actually do a lot of work.
Yeah.
So that's just some things, and like I said, we'll talk more about like what to look for in an actual camera. This was more so just to show what the different kinds of cameras are, since cameras are they're like, cameras are the center of the entire production. So you want to make sure that you've got the camera that's going to meet whatever you're trying to do. And then once you have that, you work around getting everything else. So we're going to delve into like what to look for in a camera. There's a lot of different things that can or cannot be in them, and that change what they can look like or what they can do. And we'll talk all about that, I think, next week. But those are all some things you definitely want to keep in mind whenever you're trying to buy a camera. It's like there's so much stuff that goes into researching it and why you would want one over the other, and why nobody can just say, oh, you should get this camera, because they don't know if you're using it for documentary reasons. They don't know if you're using it in low light. They don't know if you're using it outdoors mostly. They don't know if you're using it because you want to shoot slow motion. There's so many different things that go into it that change what you might want to look for. So those are all some things that you had to like look out for when you're trying to buy a camera.
Did you guys go to B&H when you guys were in New York?
What was that?
Did you go to B&H when you guys went to New York?
No, we didn't go.
We should have.
What? Oh yeah, you missed
we didn't.
We didn't have time to do so many things, dude.
All right, I'm gonna move on to project files real quick so we can get this done. Project files are basically what we were talking about. It's the same thing as those XML files that are created when you use Timecode to sync your footage. Oh, Raphael, B&H is a store for cameras and film equipment and photography equipment and stuff like that. They have an online website that it goes into detail, has a lot of articles and stuff about which ones, and a lot of good information on there.
It's camera heaven. So like they have a lot of these cameras that we're talking about, like the Blackmagic and stuff. They have them out there on display. Like you're not gonna go to Best Buy and see a Blackmagic on display. Like I went all the way to New York just so I can hold the Blackmagic in my hand before I bought it, and that's when I initially made my decision to buy the camera. So it's worth checking it out if you live in New York. But I think everybody that's into cinematography should definitely go experience going. It's a pretty popular store.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even know. I didn't know it was in New York, actually. I know about it, but I didn't know it was in New York, like the location of it.
Yeah, it's in Manhattan.
Oh man, that would have been cool.
Pretty huge place.
Bro, we were literally right there.
They have like
Right.
4
We had
to like.
so much crap to do and so many places to go. We would have never
What'd you
done
say,
everything.
Mai?
Oh no, I was just having a quick question in terms of if you're pitching something for Netflix, is Blackmagic something that they is a camera that they approve of?
It is.
I believe so. We'll be looking into that in this semester later on.
Okay.
But I believe
Yeah.
so.
I'm
It
very
is.
much interested in learning.
You said it is, Brian?
That side of things, like pitching to like people.
Red, and I
Netflix and things. Those are very good. Very good question. Who asked that?
My?
Oh, very good question, Mine.
I think Brian, you said it is, right?
It is. It is. It's one of those cameras that's approved by it. That, and I think one of the Canon, like a Canon C300 or something like that, is.
Canon C300. Good
Yeah.
to know, because like if you as a team decide to like create something and pitch it like a 15-minute or video or whatever you're using for your pitching.
But on that, as far as pitching stuff to Netflix, they put that speculation there specifically to keep people from submitting trash because they're a streaming service. So they're streaming.
Yeah.
So like if you give them like footage, like their whole thing is we stream 1080p and blah 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 blah. If you submit something that's like shot on your phone that's not degrading phones or anything, like Priscilla said, you could shoot some awesome stuff on a phone, but there are people that would try to submit stuff shot on their cell phone and they're not good quality video. So they put that try to get rid of all the bozos. That's all it is. Because at the end of the day, when you put the footage into your editor, what codec that's coming out is going in and it's going into your computer in a specific codec, but it's coming out on a different codec. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. They can't go and say, oh, you didn't. There's really no proof. There's no watermark that says you didn't shoot on a Netflix specific camera. They have no way of telling. Only way they can tell is to say, oh, well, it looked like shit. I mean, that's the only way they're going to be able to tell that you did not shoot on a.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I've heard of is that I don't know how true this is, which is why we're going to look it up later. And we're going to get more into like this kind of stuff also when we're talking about distributing next semester. But one thing I've heard is that the Netflix approved cameras is actually for when you're trying to make an original with them, which I mean, you can't just go up to them and ask them to make an original. You have to go through one of their approved distributors already, or the production companies or whatever.
Yeah.
You have to pitch it to them and then they help you pitch it to Netflix. But if they approve that, then you have to have their approved cameras and their requirements and everything. But if you already have something filmed, this is what I've heard, so we'll look it up later. But if you already have something filmed, Netflix can take it and post it on their thing without it being from an approved camera or whatever. Those requirements are just for if you're trying to get them to pay for the production to make it a Netflix original. Like I said, I'm not sure how true
that makes sense. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because I have a camera guy who has a Blackmagic Pocket 6X. So I was just trying to figure, if my grant gets approved and if everything comes, I'm like, oh, can I also pitch it there? So
Right,
mine was working. But thanks, Brian, and thanks, Lakota.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so project files. Project files, they're basically just like those XML files. The project file itself, whenever you're in an editing system, I know Premiere does this, I know Final Cut does this, I know DaVinci does this. I'm pretty sure every single one does it. What they do is they create a project file when you're editing. This way, I'm sure the reason is so that it doesn't slow down the editor and it doesn't take up too much RAM and things like that. Because what it actually does in these project files, when you're saving the file on, let's say if you're working in Premiere, you save a project and you get out, you're not actually saving all of the footage and the audio in that file. All that file is doing is keeping the information about the sequences you've made, the different assets, which are the different clips and the different audio clips, the different video clips, settings, how you capture transitions, any audio mixing you did to the files, where the in and out points were and where you trimmed it. So it's just keeping those information pieces. And then when you load it in, it's pointing in the direction where it's found in your computer. So it's saying go into folder, go to the desktop, then go into footage folder and then click on, and then that piece of footage is found here. And so it's just pointing in the direction. It's not actually saving the source information.
Mhm.
So when you're working in an editor, you want to make sure, again, before you import anything into an editor, you want to name the files, and you want to, or at least put them in a folder that you know where it's going to be, and you're not going to move it around after the fact. You're going to put it somewhere where it's going to stay until you're done editing. And the reason that is because if you start editing, let's say you got your memory card out of your camera, you plug it into your computer, and you start working on editing it. And then when you're done editing, you save the project file, you take the memory card out, and you go back and put that back in your camera. And then you come back to editing the next day, you're going to get a bunch of your media that's going to look like this. It's going to say media offline, media not found, something like that, one of those, depending on what system you're using. And it's doing that because it can no longer find that media. It didn't actually save the source media in the editing system. It just pointed to the file. And because it was on a memory card, it was saying, hey, look in this memory card and look in this folder. And that's where the footage is.
Yeah.
So to get it to be media online again, and to get the media to be back and to see it, you would have to plug the memory card back in, and then you'd have to tell the editing system where to find it. And once you tell it where to find it, it would connect it back and it'd be there again. But it takes more time. It is a little more worrying because maybe you forgot where you moved it to. Maybe you had it on your computer and you moved it somewhere, and now you kind of forgot where it is. So it takes a little longer to try to figure it out, especially if you renamed the file in the editing system, but you didn't rename it on the computer. Well, now you have these two separate files. It's a little harder to figure out which one goes where. One of the good things is if you have multiple clips and you're trying to tell it where to find the footage, if you click on the wrong one, it usually will pop up an error message that says like, these settings aren't the same. This clip is supposed to be 1 minute and 13 seconds long, but you're clicking on a clip that's 2 minutes long. And then it's like, I'm not going to put this in because I don't think this is the right thing. Sometimes it'll go through anyway, and then you'll have all of this stuff out of sync and it'll be the wrong footage and all these things. And you have to redo everything. Not redo like editing, but you have to relocate it again and relink it to show it where it's actually found. But for the most part, if you click on the wrong footage, it'll tell you that it's an error and it doesn't match the original. So it's not the end of the world per se, but it does add a little bit more work and a little bit more headache, especially if you can't find it. If it was on a memory card, let's say, and then that memory card didn't belong to you, you saved it in your project file, so you thought you were good, and then you gave that memory card back to whoever it was owned by. They take it and they're gone. Well, now you have to somehow get that memory card back. Hopefully they didn't erase the information on there and format it to their camera, because then you just lost all that footage. I've actually heard of that happening before. Someone that was brand new to editing, they didn't know that they didn't know that the project files don't actually save the footage. So they thought they had it all saved and they gave the memory card back. The person formatted it and then all that footage was erased and it was gone. So that whole day of work, or that whole, however long they worked on it, if they filmed the entire thing at once, all of it was gone. So you just want to be sure that you're paying extra special attention to it, making sure that you're naming it, organizing it before you put it into your editor, and then try not to move it or rename it after you put it in, because otherwise you'll get this media offline. Oh, and I mean, that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that?
No.
All right. So yeah, that was it. It's just make sure whenever you are editing, you just know that it's not actually using the files. It's just pointing in the direction of them. And then when you're like rendering it and exporting it, that's when it actually brings in those files and chops them all up and does that, which is why it takes so long, because it's actually doing the work. It's really just doing like showing what will happen later whenever you're editing. And then when you start rendering and exporting, it's actually doing that work and chopping up the image and doing all that. It doesn't affect the source media because it doesn't want to degrade it as well. So that way, if you're editing it once and you don't like it, you can edit it again and you're not really degrading it until you start rendering it, which is why when you render it, put it back into an editor, render it again, eventually it's going to get very degraded and look very ugly the more you do that.
Bless
Also,
you.
I would like to add that, like I keep saying, that the industry is very name brand specific, specifically because when you're editing and you make all these project files, like when you're doing work with documentary companies or anything like that, they'll ask for the project files from you, and they'll give it to somebody else to continue to edit. They'll give them the footage, you send them the project file, and they'll pick up where you left off to kind of like I do work for a company called Lemon Light, and they're based all the way out in California. So like their cinematographers will shoot stuff. They'll send me the footage through the internet, which takes me forever to download. And then they'll send me the project file, and I'll just open it up and continue wherever it was left off at, I'll pick up or whatever. So that's one of the reasons why it's a good reason to be name specific, where they'll ask you when they're questioning you, do you edit on Premiere? Because that company uses Premiere. What nowadays, like they've been trying to make it so that all the different editors are compatible with each other, so that you would be able to open up a project file from Premiere and open it up in Final Cut, and it'll just like take those numbers, because that's all it is a bunch of numbers and algorithms and stuff, and it'll just try to copy it. But it's still not the same because the color calibrations in each software is different. So if you're doing a lot of like color grading and stuff, it's not always going to look the same when you're opening it up in another editor. But they're trying to make it so that all the editors do the same thing now, where you can, edit the same project in different editing softwares, and it's just personal preference now. You can edit in whatever you want. We're not 100% there yet, but we're getting there.
Awesome. It's
That's
good to
awesome.
be. We'll get
Does
there.
anybody have any questions or comments about Premiere? I mean, not Premiere, just project files in general, editing, how they work. So going back to the XML files, whenever you're syncing with timecode, it's going to make those files that point in the direction of the source files. And you're going to put those XML files into the editing software, which is going to make a project file based on the XML files, based on the source files, which is why you don't want to move those source files, because it's going to mess up that workflow. That's why it adds that extra step, and you just want to make sure that you have it in a spot that you're going to keep it before you even sync it together, because those XML files are going to be pointing in the direction, and then the project file is going to be pointing to the XML file, pointing to the source file in that direction. So it's an extra step, and so you don't want to move either of those, the XML files or the video or audio files, the actual source files later on once you have it into the editing software. Other than that, I'm just going to say on Monday, we're going to look into finding funds for a project. We're going to see some different ways some people have done it. This is mainly for independent sources. You're not really going to be we're not going to be talking as much about how the large companies do it and things like that, because it's a bit more detailed and hard to do, and it takes a bit more know-how. But just like how you can possibly get some funds for your film, and who you might be able to ask, and where you might be able to go to get some if there's any websites, things like that. Video editing tool basics. We'll talk about 6 main editing tools that you can use and that speed up your edit and what they do. Transitions and titles. So we'll be talking about different things with editing, and then just finding funds for your project. That's what we're going over Monday.
Okay, so we don't have any information on how the big producers do that? I'm kind of.
I'm not really focused on looking into that because that is that's like getting named actors and named directors and attaching huge names to it to get executive producers to help you out on it. And you have to have somebody that knows what they're doing and has connections in those companies to be able to even get in the door to pitch the idea. So it takes a lot more like being in the industry and being involved and knowing people and having connections to be able to get that kind of funding.
Yeah,
Which is why I was like, you can go to those kinds of people and pitch the idea to them, but it is also harder to get to them because they are busier and higher up in this industry.
that's true.
So we'll just be looking at it more from an independent standpoint, and maybe in one of those they'll talk about possibly trying to get it to that. But even like pitching to Netflix and things like that, you have to go through one of their approved production companies or producers or whatever you call it, where they are they've worked with Netflix before and they know what they're doing, and Netflix knows that they know what they're doing, and so you go to them instead of directly to Netflix because Netflix doesn't have the time or cares about hearing all of these pitches. They only care about hearing it from these people they've worked with before, and so you go to them instead. And so you have to get a way to get into so there's like a few extra steps you have to take when you are unknown and you don't have these connections already. Then if you're already in the industry and you have, and you know the guy that works at Disney and you're trying to get some Disney money, then you can just go to him and be like, hey, I have this idea. What is Disney?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Connections really. Yeah.
Yes, what was that?
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask, so when you mean a producer, like it can be from any country, or I'm just curious because my connections are in India, and let's say I'm pitching for Netflix, I mean like the Western world here, but if I know a producer in India who's done like local films and worked with the local Netflix, would that, like, how does that work? I'm just curious.
I am not exactly sure, but I would think that the people in India would have more connections with India. If like whatever Netflix does in India, they would have more connections in that area. And a lot of stuff that happens there, or a lot of stuff that happens in like other countries, it doesn't come to America as often as American stuff goes out to other countries. So it would depend on who they know and who they can get you in with. Like it definitely helps to know people that know people. I just don't know how much it would help you to be able to get somebody here or to get produced here based on people that they know over there. Just because, there's a lot of productions and stuff that happen over in India that have never come over to America, even dubbed versions of it. Only the biggest stuff that comes over.
Yeah. Now I was just curious. I know somebody there. That's why I was like, I'm going to reach out.
Oh yeah, I would definitely. Anybody I would definitely just reach out to whoever, because you never know. So might as well try, right?
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions or comments or anything?
No, not for today.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming. Hopefully I'll see you guys Monday. If not, see you guys some other time. Have a good night.
See you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.